Hey, welcome back, everyone, to the Black Brain Trust. This is episode 194, Geopolitics. Please click the like button as you come in. Share this video if possible, and then we will get started. Q497, what's going on? I'll give you guys 30 more seconds before you can get in here before I get started. I'm good, Q. What's going on with you? All right, let me get started. All right, so first item on the docket is from the ACLU.org. What Officer Noor's conviction says about racism in America. On Tuesday, April 30th, a Minnesota jury convicted police officer Mohammed Noor of third-degree murder and second-degree manslaughter for shooting and killing Justine Damone, a white Australian woman. Damone had called 911 to report a possible sexual assault near her apartment and then approached Noor's squad car when he and his partner responded to the call. Noor killed Damone, and he deserved to be found guilty. His decision to shoot and kill an unarmed person without warning, apparently because her presence next to his squad car surprised him, is indefensible. But if the races of Noor and Damone had been reversed, Noor might well have gotten away with murder. The racial aspect of this case speaks volumes about criminal justice and criminal injustice in America today. Noor, who is black, Muslim, and a Somali immigrant, is believed to be the only police officer in Minnesota ever to be convicted for killing someone while on duty. At a crucial moment in the trial, Noor testified that he reacted to Damone as the threat. Prosecutors responded by asking him, "The whole blonde hair, pink t shirt is a threat to you." This line of questioning was in part about the legal standard required to convict. Under Graham versus Connor, a police officer can use force, including lethal force, if a reasonable officer on the scene would consider the level of force to be objectively reasonable, not whether the use of force was actually necessary in light of various tactics and alternatives available to the officer at the time. Because because this standard is so elastic, it is often very difficult to show that an officer violated. But the way the question was framed also invokes a long history of racist fears and tropes of black male aggression against white women. In art, popular culture, and news coverage, from Birth of a Nation to Gone with the Wind to countless episodes of Cops, white women have long been portrayed as innocent victims and symbols of so called white purity, who need to be saved from racistly presupposed savagery of angry, violent black men. These racist ideas are not limited to the movie theater and TV screen. They have also infected our politics. During the 1980 during the 1988 presidential campaign, George H.W. Bush played on fears of blackmail crime with the Willie Horton attack ad. The ad, displaying a mugshot of a black man with a wild beard and glazed eyes, described how Willie Horton had been convicted of murder, sent to prison, released on a weekend furlough, and then carried out a violent break-in during which he raped a young white woman. As one strategist put it, the prospect of a man from Massachusetts releasing black criminals all across the country and letting them rape our white women and children was crucial in Bush's defeat of Michael Dukakis. Such tropes are also not a relic of the 20th century. In his invocations of Beautiful Kate in San Francisco, shot by an illegal, and various anti-Muslim comments, President Trump has deployed the narrative of white female victimhood in ways that have rightly drawn comparisons to the Willie Horton ad. Naming these racist tropes, it is difficult to believe that the prosecutors, when preparing their questions, didn't realize they were invoking them. Their blonde hair, pink T-shirt question is particularly inflammatory as it depends on the assumption that Justine Damon's blonde hair signified a lack of dangerousness. Indeed, Damon, blonde, blue-eyed, white, is the ideal victim by prosecutors could take advantage of racist tropes to secure a conviction of Noor. The case is exception and it spotlights the rule. Most victims of police violence have racism working against them, not in their favor. The most recent such prosecution in Minnesota of Officer Geronimo Yanez for shooting and killing Philando Castile, a 32-year-old black man, ended with the officer being acquitted of all criminal charges. Castile, a registered firearm owner, was pulled over by Yanez in July 2016. Yanez approached Castile's car and ordered Castile to provide both his license and registration. Castile's girlfriend and child were both in the car with him. After handing Yanez his registration, Castile said in a calm tone, "Sir, I have to tell you what I have. I have to tell you that I do have a firearm on me," which is exactly what gun owners are taught to do in this situation. Yanez told Castile not to touch it, while which Castile replied, "I'm not pulling it out." Castile, who still needed to pick up his license and hand it to Yanez, repeatedly stated that he was not and would not reach for his firearm. As Castillo reached in the direction of his license, despite these assurances and the confirmation from Castillo's girlfriend that he wasn't reaching for the firearm, Yanez wrongly and unjustifiably believed Castillo was instead reaching for the gun. Yanez then fatally shot Castillo 7 times. At his trial, Yanez claimed that he feared Castillo was reaching for the gun, despite the body camera and cell phone footage that documented the brief 40 seconds of interaction leading up to Yanez's decision to kill Castillo. Yanez was acquitted of all charges as the jury deemed his fear of Castillo grabbing a firearm to be reasonable. Unfortunately, in the rare cases that officers are actually charged with fatal killings, these acquittals are the norm. I don't want to read all of this, but I think you guys get the point that I'm reading from here. That a black Muslim Somali brother um, is actually doing his job and should have been protected under the under the Police Act of using justifiable force. He is actually having a system work against him. So joining the police department, for those who want to say black men should join the police department, in these cases, I don't know if that actually works. My position on this is that the system is working against even black police officers. So I'm not sure, where all of this these suggestions are coming from that more black men join the police department that this will solve things. What's going on, Lionel?
Hey, what's going on? How you doing?
All right, yourself?
I'm all right. I'm all right.
You have anything you want to add to the discussion about Officer Noor, Somali brother who is being convicted today or this week?
No, no. No.
Okay.
Wait, is that the one? No, 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 no. I'm getting people mixed up. No, I don't have anything.
All right. So my further position on this is that uh, I thought Minnesota was supposed to be this progressive state. Uh, it was supposed to be this basking of success for black men to be up there, but apparently that's not the case. Even if you are working in law enforcement, there is a brother on YouTube, actually in Black Gnostic Speaks um, hangout on Saturdays, named Officer Charles. So I would love to hear what his opinion is on this, as someone who does work in law enforcement. So. Um, it's one of those things that people want to say that racism doesn't exist. All these quote unquote liberals who want to talk about this stuff, they don't realize that even on both sides of the table, or both sides of the coin, you're still subjected to the same exact tyranny that most poor black people are subjected to. So it doesn't matter which side of the fence you're on. All right, let me get to this next article. All right, this next one is from mintpressnews.com. Sri Lanka, how Saudi-backed terror targeted China's allies. As predicted, the Sri Lankan Easter Day blast, which killed hundreds and injured hundreds more, have been connected to the so-called Islamic State. U.S. ambassadors to Sri Lanka, Elena Teplitz, would openly claim foreign groups were most likely behind attacks. Reuters, in an article titled "Foreign Groups Likely Behind Sri Lanka Attacks," U.S. ambassador says, uh, would report the scale of and sophistication of the Easter Day attacks on churches and hotels in Sri Lanka suggested the involvement of an external group such as Islamic State. The U.S. ambassador said on Wednesday as the death toll jumped to 359. ISIS itself would also claim responsibility for the attacks. The Washington Post, in an article titled Sri Lankan Easter Bombings Claimed by ISIS, showed the group maintains influence even though its caliphate is gone, would claim. On Tuesday, video emerged of the suspected ringleader of the attacks and seven followers, their faces obscured by scars swearing allegiance to the Islamic State and its leader, Abu Bakr al Baghdadi. The Islamic State also issued a formal communique asserting responsibility for the attacks, which it said targeted Christians in coalition countries. Absent from the U.S. diplomatic statements and Western media reports is any mention of ISIS inception, its state sponsors, and even admissions by Western intelligence agencies themselves of Washington and its allies' role in the terrorist organization's rise. At face value, devastating and disputive recently and decisively pivoted from west to east and is now a major partner of Beijing's One Belt, One Road initiative. It's suspiciously coincidental. Examining the West's decades of using terrorism, particularly terrorism fueled by Saudi Wahhabism, and the inception of ISIS itself, leaves Washington and its partners as the prime suspects behind Sri Lanka's tragic terrorist attack, with its motivation strikingly similar to what prompted the U.S. Saudi aided rise and use of Muslim Brotherhood and Al Qaeda throughout the Cold War. When the U.S. engineered regime change stalled in Syria between 2011 and 2012, it became clear more drastic and open measures would be required. This included not only Western media mobilizing a massive propaganda campaign to account for the increasingly overt role terrorist organizations were playing among supposed moderate rebel formations, but also in the sudden appearance, rise, and overwhelming force of the Islamic State. Um, this is the DIA, which is a Defense Intelligence Agency, uh, revealed this classified document, which has not been redacted, but it's not all of it is posted. Well, it is actually all of it is posted. Sorry. So here's proof of the memo. The memo will explicitly state that if the situation unravels, there is a possibility of establishing a declared or undeclared Salafist principality in the eastern Syria, and this is exactly what the supporting powers to the opposition want in order to isolate the Syrian regime, which is considered the strategic death of the Shia expansion, Iraq and Iran. Let me just read this real quick. Washington's Salafist principality versus China. In Asia, where Washington's self-proclaimed primacy has waned in recent years as China rises, traditional allies like the Philippines have begun to seek bilateral ties with Beijing, negating Washington's supposed role in underwriting what is called free, open, and rules-based order in the Indo-Pacific region. In 2016, Manila sought to have U.S. troops removed from its territory. In October 2016, article by the Independent titled "Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte orders U.S. forces out of country, cutting 65 years of military ties" would report the president of the Philippines has promised to dismantle the nation's 65-year military presence with the United States, warning Washington not to treat the nation like a doormat. Duterte has ordered 28 annual military exercises with U.S. forces to be halted and an ongoing U.S. Philippines and amphibious beach landing exercise to be the last in his 6-year presidency. This year would be the last, said Mr. Duterte, referring to military exercises involving the U.S. in a speech on Friday in southern Davao City. The Independent also report, "For as long as I'm here, do not treat us like a doormat because you'll be sorry for it. I will not speak with you. I can always go to China." The following year, beginning in May 2017, ISIS terrorists suddenly appeared, overrunning the city of Mawari, the U.S.-based Serendipitous development to not only insert U.S. military forces into the fighting, the New York Times reported, but has since used the threat of ISIS resurgence in the Philippines as a pretext to pressure Manila in maintaining a permanent U.S. military presence in the Southeast Asian state. U.S. government-funded propaganda outlet Rappler would report in a 2019 article titled, "Despite Duterte rhetoric, U.S. military gains forward base in Philippines." The United States has gained a forward base for its Pacific Air Force in the Philippines, despite President Duterte rhetoric against the country's oldest security ally and former colonial master in his pivot to China. This is really messy. Um, I know it's a lot to read, but it's you have to put all of this into context so that people listening to this really have an understanding of how many moving pieces there are on the chessboard at one time. Usually on the chessboard you move one piece at a time, but in regards to Duterte of the Philippines and President Xi Jinping in China, the request for help from Moscow, President Putin saying to Duterte, "You can have anything you want, shy of a nuclear weapons." Um, the United States moving things around. There's a whole lot of moving pieces that's involved in Indo-Pacific region. So,
Yeah, I
hey, what's
see.
going on to everybody in the chat who just joined?
What's going on?
We
Excuse
got
me.
24 people watching. We got 24 people watching. Please hit the like button if you have not. If you're not going to participate in the chat, just hit the like button.
Yeah, I see. It's a lot of moving pieces. I was listening to that. It's not really a cut and dry. Oh, this person is doing is bad, so we can do this. It's a lot of uh dominoes in it. That one country is affected by this, so they doing this, and so it's a lot. You said it best. Like, there's nothing more I can put it say in the words, but yeah, it's a lot of moving pieces.
Yeah, the Philippines is massive in terms of size because it has multiple islands. It's not like it's one big island. It's multiple islands that it has to manage. So in order to get from one island to the other, you have to use a ferry. For the most part, there are no real bridges and stuff connected to it. So at least to my knowledge, they don't have a whole lot of bridges connected to it. I can't really confirm that, but um, in order to manage all of these places, you're gonna have to have a very strong military presence because the Philippines is situated in a way in the region that it makes it easier to attack China, but it also makes it difficult for anybody passing through that ocean, through the South China Sea. So they can hit anything coming through there. It's actually pretty good. So, oh, SBI Latinos in the Philippines. Do you know how anybody gets around from island to island in the Philippines? Is it by ferry? Is it by bridge? How is that connected? Type that in the chat. Yeah, by plane and ferry. So it makes sense. All right, let me get to this next article. All right, this one is from the National Interest. Check out Russia's secret MiG-28 fighter, or perhaps from North Korea. Yes, Top Gun is not a documentary, but it is honestly a credit to the film's greatness that even the most discerning audiences were able to easily suspend disbelief over details like these. Perhaps taking a fun movie too seriously is the wrong approach. But if we don't hold the production folks in Hollywood liable for their terrible military design choices, no one will. In 1986, Top Gun flew into theaters and into the hearts. Sure, Tony Scott's military rom-com opus didn't wow critics and moviegoers when it first premiered, but it quickly became one of America's favorite military classics. I mean, Top Gun's Top Gun has everything. Tom Cruise, F-14 Tomcats, angry cigar smoking staff officers, sweet motorcycles, volleyball. But despite the film's glory, there's one element of Top Gun that's been the cause of angry yelling, much debate in the task and purpose office in recent days. Just who exactly are those ballsy Navy aviators supposed to be fighting? While the film leaves the identity of the antagonist internationally or intentionally vague, a combination of dialogue, markings, and behind the scenes trivia from the producers and screenwriters provide we can give a good guess at who this mystery enemy is. Let's break it down. The enemy planes encountered by crews in the closing act of the film are actually F-5E Tiger twos of the Navy Fighter Weapons School, and the lightweight aircraft used as aggressor aircraft during exercises in the 1980s. The aggressor aircraft Tom Cruise kills uh, below below the hard deck in the film was in fact a Douglas A-4 Skyhawk. The MiG-28 moniker reportedly evolved from a pile of script rewrites, likely a slight nod to the then secretive MiG-29 fulcrum. But it's worth noting that in one draft of the script by Prosser, the enemy fighters are MiG-21s, an aircraft that has existed since the late 1950s. This, this suggests that early drafts of the script were in the works well before the 1986 release. Interestingly enough, F-14s did engage MiG-21s in air-to-air engagements, but they were Iranian F-14 squaring off against Iraq's MiG-21s. Based on the timing of the script, writing process, and Top Gun's actual release, the go-to assumption is that the MiG-28 is a Soviet fighter. However, the markings on the fictional MiG-28 aren't Soviet. The MiG-28 in the film has a single red star surrounded by a yellow circle on their tail as their only marking. While Soviet aircraft traditionally had a white trim to their red star, just to cover my bases, the North Korea Air Force uses a blue trim. However, one country does in fact use yellow trim on their red star insignia, China. That the enemy was never officially established in Prose's early draft to Jack Epps Jr.'s final script. This was likely intentional. Um, Flannery's governments in the movies are routinely left vague as to not piss off their real world counterparts, with the exception of North Korea, possibly because North Korea doesn't have a strong market for movies or video games. Indeed, the video game Homeland and the Red Dawn reboot film, both of the both of which involve a North Korean invasion of the U.S., made course corrections in production to keep angering the Chinese government. Despite the markings, North Korea is still a good guess. Producers Jerry Bruckheimer and Don Simpson had more than one writer working on Top Gun script, along with Prose's draft. Jim Cash and Jack Epps Jr. were hired to write another draft of the screenplay for the film that initially identified North Korea as a threat that Maverick and Co. take on in the film. This is interesting because I've never really I've never been a big fan of Top Gun, and I'm a big fan of military movies. So um, I never really understood, what all the fanfare was about when it comes to this stuff. So
Yeah, I saw Top Gun, and to me, at least to me, the fanfare was the wow, look how cool it is, look how fun they're having. They get to do this, they get to travel the world. It's like no rules. Much like it was a movie called Navy SEALs with the guy that the movie star that got AIDS, but and there was someone like it, like Top Gun, but it's funny how spot on some movies are can be in terms in this specific term with military hardware.
Mhm. 31 people watching, 20 likes. If you're not going to say anything in the chat or participate in the chat, can you please hit the like button?
Yes.
All right, this one is from next one is from ABC News. Venezuelan foreign minister, Russian military presence could be expanded. Venezuela's foreign minister says the country may expand the presence of Russian military specialists there, as Moscow and Washington accuse each other of interfering in the country's crisis. Russia has had deep military cooperation with Venezuela over the years, including supplying weapons and aircraft. It sent military advisors to the troubled South American nation this year as tensions grew over opposition leader Juan Guaido's attempts to oust President Maduro. The United States recognizes Guaido as interim president. Foreign Minister Jorge Ariza spoke with Moscow on Monday, a day after meeting Russia's top diplomat Sergei Lavrov, who is to meet U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo later in the day. Ariza told reporters, my dude Zoe came in here with all the noise. Ariza told reporters, at present there is a commission of Russian specialists in Venezuela. It could be expanded. So Jorge, who is the Venezuelan foreign minister, is basically throwing the gauntlet down, saying, "I got guys from Moscow here ready to go. We're gonna expand this even further." So when they talk about expanding military personnel, they're basically going to put them in strategic areas where you can't bomb any of these areas without killing Russian military, and using Russian military as a tripwire. That's a declaration of war. You don't want to kill Russian soldiers on the ground. So stop by say.
Nabule? Can you hear me?
Namule, my friend. Namule. Yes, sir.
All right, no doubt, no doubt. What's going on, Mike? What's going on, Lionel? What's going on, brothers?
Oh, we're chilling, brothers. I'm good,
I
brother.
know, I know doubt. Yeah,
What's
so
going on? What's
this,
going on?
what's going on, Lionel? Yeah, but this Venezuelan story, uh, with Russia expanding its military presence, it's just like what you said, Mike. It's to be a tripwire, not to let the United States, uh, even have the thought of intervening, because already the U.S. is already a bit apprehensive of intervening in Venezuela. I think I read somewhere last week that the Pentagon, like the Pentagon, is against this. They do not want to intervene into Venezuela because they had to brief Pompeo and Pence, like, "Yo, jungle warfare ain't no joke." Uh, and with all that, but I think this is Russia adding another layer to all this, whereas, listen, don't even have the thought of intervening into Venezuela. Don't send the Marines in. Don't start airstrikes or whatever. Put them in strategic locations, kind of like in Syria, where you know the U.S. when they did their like airstrikes against Syria was basically limited. But even then, they had to let the Russians know beforehand. But in regards to Venezuela, Russia's not going to let that happen. So I see this is just uh, Maduro, uh, basically putting a tripwire for himself, so it could stave off the huge appetite the U.S. has to intervene. And I think another issue too is as the option of outright military intervention is closed, the U.S. will try to do what they did, I think was last week, with that, whack insurrection where they got like like those quote unquote soldiers, trying to, rise up and whatever. So I think the only option, and I've said this multiple times on this platform, the only option they have left is probably, I call the Syria option, which is they'll probably try to arm whatever opposition they have. That even though, like you always point out, Mike, it's very difficult because the military controls the border. Um, the government's paramilitary forces control the border, so it's going to be difficult in doing that. But but Washington and the rest of the Western powers, they're going to have to try something. They're running out of ideas, and I think the only option they have left is try to start a civil war in Venezuela. And that's the worst option. Like, let's be clear, that's the worst option because it can backfire in the U.S. badly. Because if you have a civil war going on in Latin America, you know, you can have that chaos and that bloodshed spread to Colombia because FARC is in Venezuela. The ELN is in Venezuela. They can restart operations in Colombia and plunge that country into chaos. Hell, a lot of the gangs in Brazil, a lot of the gangs in the favelas in Brazil get their weapons from FARC, so they could start some shit. So it'll be the worst option, but I don't see Washington letting up at this point. I guess outright military intervention is out the window now. Like if you put more Russian soldiers, that's not happening. The Marines are not coming in. They're not going to reach Caracas. That's not happening. But they will try. They will try because there's no letting up. They're going to have to, because they invested so much into this, they're going to have to try to do something else. So the only option they have now is probably civil war and armed insurrection. But there'll be major blowback for that.
I know you have anything you want to add to that?
No.
Yeah. So you're right in your assessment, so because what's happening is that the United States really can't get in. This is not like Syria where it's flat desert land where you can just bust your tanks through there and bust your Humvees through there. It's not the same. Most of the ingress and egress areas of penetration would be challenged by Venezuelan military, and they're not. Venezuela is not the same as Syria, where they're being bogged down by domestic terrorists. So the military is not occupied. Their military is actually on standby, ready to go. They brought the S-300s out and the S-200, as well as the S-75 out, and all of those weapons are Soviet made, but they're still formidable for war. I would not want to be on the opposite end of an old school missile. I don't care who makes it. Bullets hurt, missiles hurt.
Yeah, I agree. But I think that the biggest issue is the United States has never faced a power that has a redundant air defense system. I mean, let's think about it. When they bombed Saddam Hussein in 1991, I mean, Saddam Hussein just came out of a bloody war with Iran, and his military was in tatters. And then in 2003, you just mashed mashed up the remnant of it. In Afghanistan, the Taliban didn't really have any air defense system, so the U.S. has never. I think only Yugoslavia when they shot down that American jet. I think that was the. I think that was the F-117.
That was
That
the
was the only.
Serbs.
Yeah, yeah.
It happened in Yugoslavia, but it was the Serbs who shot it down.
Right. So it was like, and the Serbs didn't really have a advanced air defense system. So this would be the first time they would go
Actually,
against
shot it
that.
down.
Well, you can keep talking, Mike.
No, I was just saying. You said they didn't have an advanced air system. They had the Buk. the Russian Buk system, and they also had the what would be considered the S-200.
Okay, okay. So all right, so it was pretty advanced, but so the main point is that the U.S. has never faced a redundant, hardened air defense system, and that's why in Syria, when they did those, whack airstrikes, they were shook because what Russia did in Syria was make a redundant, hardened air defense system that the U.S. the U.S. Air Force was worried that we could our planes could get shot down, so we have to just tell the Russians like we're gonna do this bombing campaign, please, 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 please don't shoot our planes down. We're only gonna bomb some insignificant like locations, but we good, right? So I don't see if that's the case in Venezuela, they're not going to Venezuela, and that's also another reason why they didn't go into Iran or North Korea because you know these air defense systems can lead to your planes get shot down, and that would eliminate the myth of American invincibility. So
Hmm. All right, this next article is from the Moscow Times. Russia warns U.S. over aggressive moves in Venezuela. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov told U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo that further steps would be fraught with the gravest consequences. Russian Minister Sergei Lavrov told U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo by phone that further aggressive steps in Venezuela will be fraught with the gravest consequences, Russian Foreign Ministry said on Wednesday. Lavrov also condemned what he called the United States interference in Venezuela's internal affairs as a breach of international law, adding that dialogue between all political forces is required in the Latin American country. So, Russian Foreign Minister not playing games. Um, he's letting everybody know that it doesn't matter if doesn't matter about the Monroe Doctrine that we're here. So
the age of multipolarity is here, man. I mean, the days of just U.S. unipolarity been done. It died in the sands of Iraq, man. Like it died in the sands of the Middle East. Like the U.S. the U.S. cannot do what it could do back in the 90s where they could intervene anywhere and what they said was God. So this is Russia basically saying like, listen, you're not gonna you cannot just treat the world like it's your backyard, like Monroe Doctrine or not. Like we're gonna stand with Venezuela because you know it's the legitimate regime. It won elections. The opposition is not united. It's it's Western backed, so we support the legitimate government of Venezuela, which is President Maduro, it's not Guaidó. I know Guaidó tried to say like the Constitution says a National Assembly president, whatever, uh, but the whole point of the whole point is we're in an age of multipolarity where Russia, China, other powers are stepping up to the plate. So the U.S. is not the only game in town. And the crazy thing is, everyone gets it, but the policymakers in Washington don't think like that. They still think this is pre 9/11, you know, United States of America, where they can intervene anywhere and no one can stand up. This ain't the 90s no more. Russia, their economies recover. Okay, you put sanctions on them, that ain't slowing them down. You want to have a trade with China, good luck, but it's going to hurt your economy. And China's still growing at a rapid rate. So we're in an age where it's no longer one single superpower that dictates everything. You have two, three, or four different superpowers that are vying for control. And the scary thing is, and that's what makes it scary, is that Washington doesn't realize that. And usually, when superpowers don't know when they're on the decline, they don't know there's other competition, they will do whatever it takes to try to maintain that unipolarity, which sometimes leads to accidental war. So
Mhm. I know you have anything you want to add to this? I think Lionel took off.
Oh no, 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 I don't. I'm actually listening. I'm learning.
Okay. All right. The next one on the docket is from the Wall Street Journal. Putin punches above his weight. Russian president's global strategy keeps Moscow's tentacles in enough places that the Kremlin is ensured a seat at every table that matters. You've got to give Vladimir Putin his due. The man knows how to play a weak hand well. With relatively little investment, the Russian leader is expanding his toehold in the Western Hemisphere and potentially getting access to giant oil and uranium supplies by backing a dictator in Venezuela. With relatively little investment, he has expanded, and the story goes behind a paywall. So, just based on these few lines that I've read, I always find it interesting that the Wall Street Journal, which is owned by Amazon, which is owned by Jeff Bezos, which is a Zionist, but we won't go into that right now. Um, I always find it interesting that they say, "Oh, Maduro is a dictator." So who is that in Saudi Arabia? Who's Mohammed bin Salman? When was the last time that they had an election? Hmm? What about um, Bahrain? When's the last time that there was an election in Bahrain or the United Arab Emirates? See, dictators are only bad when they don't kowtow to pale skin philosophy.
yep, yep. Or look at Morsi in Egypt. I mean, look how many people like he slaughtered when they did that counter coup against the Muslim Brotherhood. You know what I mean? Like the crazy thing about that is that Morsi did all that. No, not Morsi. What's the name of the current president of Egypt right now? The general. But anyway, when they did
Oh,
that counter coup,
you mean Al Sisi?
yeah, Al Sisi. Look how many people they slaughtered, and this was going around the same time when the war in Syria was heating up. And then they said, "Oh, Assad must go. Assad must go." Meanwhile, your ally Egypt is like slaughtering like 700 Muslim Brotherhood, like massacring them. Like they went in and just shot them dead, no trial or nothing, and they're just mum about it. Like Obama and fucking John Kerry were just like, "Oh, word, oh that's fucked up." Like, damn, CC, bro, why did you do that? But you don't say shit because that's a dictator that you support. Um, it's just the U.S. play that the only bad dictators are the dictators that don't support that don't kowtow to us. That's why they say, oh, the regime of the Ayatollahs in Iran. Meanwhile, in Iran, they have democracy, they have elections. Meanwhile, in Saudi Arabia, they chop women's heads off for just driving. You know what I mean? If a dude looks at another man's wife, they chop that dude's head off. Or sometimes they stone the chick. You know what I mean? So it's like you support these horrible regimes, but who are you to say about this? And this is the point of American foreign policy, which is it's hypocritical. It says it does one thing, but then it does the opposite. You support human rights. You say, "Oh, we support human rights. We do this, that, and third." But look at how you're treating black people in your own country. Like, let's be real. Like you talk about, oh, the right to life, human rights, and yet you have the most incarcerated people on earth. You have the most people in your prisons than any country in the world, even China, which has a bigger population than yours. I mean, you you gentrify these black neighborhoods. You have officers kill black men and black women on camera with no justification. They get off, and you talk about peace and justice. I mean, that's just a American foreign policy. Like what Malcolm X says, America doesn't practice what they preach. It's like what Malcolm says. I have more respect for a man to let me know where he stands. You know what I mean, than one who comes like an angel, but it's not really like that. I mean, like that. That was the premise of his quote, but that's America right there. So, and another thing I have with this article too is they're trying to say like Russia is punching above its weight. This is foreign policy, man. It's a geopolitical chessboard. Russia is trying to do a checkmate against the United States. people think that Russia is this weak power that, oh, it's still like the Russia from the 90s, or oh, look at those Russians, they almost lost Chechnya in the early 2000s. Nah, Putin, the reason why Putin is so popular in Russia, people don't understand, and I talk about this with my pops, like people don't understand why Putin is so popular. Russia was in the shitter in the 90s. After the Soviet Union collapsed, their economy was looted by the West. The West was basically say, oh, open your doors, do all these reforms. And then they just came and started looting the country. Crime was high. Countries, those separatist movements all across this country. But Putin came to power and just fixed the country. He saved Russia from the brink of total collapse. And this guy's a KGB agent. This guy is smart. He knows geopolitics. He knows how to play well. And these guys in Washington and these guys in the Wall Street Journal, they're amateurs in the fact that they think of geopolitics as like, oh, well, here's our sphere of influence. Well, the whole geopolitics is America can do whatever it wants, whenever it wants, but they never hear about imperial overreach. Russia knows that America has severe imperial overreach. Okay, all right. So how are you going to Okay, you want to intervene in Venezuela, but you're still stuck in Iraq. You still have troops in Syria. You still have troops in Afghanistan. You have obligations in South Korea, and on top of it all, you're sending aircraft carriers to the Persian Gulf, preparing for a showdown with Iran. So Russia's like, all right, the U.S. is all right, the U.S. is getting entangled in many entanglements. So let's see if they can do something in Venezuela. Let's prevent them from doing that. And there's nothing they can do about it to hurt their sphere of influence in Latin America, because Russia's like, listen, for years they've expanded NATO to our backyard. Fuck it, let's do a major checkmate right now. So I don't know. These people in the Wall Street Journal are just. I would say not even the Wall Street Journal, but though the think tanks in Washington, their sense of geopolitics is they underestimate their enemies, and then they always get outsmarted and they wonder why. But it's like the arrogance of them just belittling the enemy keeps getting to them. So
Hmm. Yeah, I just wanted to actually before I even comment on the article, I wanted to address something in the chat. Uh, Gearsnet said X in the chat. Bezos a Zionist? Is he even Jewish? The first thing you need to understand about Zionism is that you don't need to be Jewish to be a Zionist. There are Christian Zionists all over the political spectrum in the United States. Chuck Schumer is a Christian Zionist. Um, Lindsey Graham is a Christian Zionist. Joe Biden openly stated a few years ago he's a Christian Zionist. He said everybody in America is a Zionist. So he's on record saying this. You can look it up on YouTube. You have to understand that Zionism has nothing to do with Judaism. It is a form of white supremacy that came out of Europe. So don't think that I'm attacking you by saying all this. I know my voice may sound a little bit more aggressive than it should.
yeah, bro, you're right though. I mean, there is Christian Zionists. For example, like those fucking evangelicals who support Israel only because they want more war, because they think it's gonna make the coming of Jesus quicker. Like I mean, I grew up on church, whatever. So I heard some of this shit growing up. You know what I mean? I'd be seeing, like, whenever my mom puts like TBN on TV, you see these pastors talking about the end of the world. They're like, oh, we gotta support Israel because Israel's God's people, but also, we need more war, chaos, so it could bring about the coming of Christ. So there is Christian Zionism. Zionism is not, you don't have to be Jewish. Zionism is the belief that Israel should be the supreme power of the Middle East just because they're pale skin. Point blank period is a white supremacist ideology. In Israel, you see how the Zionists treat, Arab Jews, how they treat black Jews. They treat them like second class citizens. So to me, that's what Zionism truly is.
Yeah, my take on the article is that what you have is Russia playing asymmetric warfare. from a political stand, from geopolitical standpoint. They don't have to have a big, large presence inside Latin America, uh, to show force. They'll just show up with a few of their guys, and the long history that the Soviet Union has played in Latin America is why you see a lot of Latins, um, a lot of constituents in Latin America moving closer to Moscow because they've always had that sort of camaraderie. Same thing in Africa. The reason why Africa works so well with with uh, 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 with China and Russia is because a lot of Africa, a lot of their cultural values align very well with Russia and China. Uh, it aligns more in line with Russia because of Russia's political stance on the continent, and it aligns well with China because of China's um, economic reach, as well as their lack of interference inside the continent itself. So, China doesn't have military jets buzzing around the continent's airspace and trying to deny, Africans their right of passage. Uh, Same thing with Moscow. Moscow doesn't have a foreign policy that goes in there and bombs out every single African state, for that matter. As a matter of fact, their Russian presence is welcomed by a lot of Africans, at least the leaders, the dictators or whatever have you. They are very much welcome. It's Europeans that they want to get rid of. It's the Europeans and the Westerners who they want to get rid of because of the poor colonial past that they have had. Keep in mind that Russia did not colonize Africa, and China has not colonized Africa. In fact, China paid for a lot of the decolonialization in the 80s and 90s. So, um, if that makes any sense to a lot of people.
I agree. And plus, I think it's you have to look at the history of people to see to see their mindset. The Russian and Chinese mindset is totally different from the American mindset. Um, Russia knows how it feels like being invaded constantly. That's why Russians have a paranoid, mindset. And it's not. I'm not meaning like in a negative connotation. It's just that if you look at the history, they kept being attacked and attacked. Russia's just like it's like that kid in class that keeps getting bullied constantly over and over again. Had to fight their way. It's like that kid. Like back in the day in New York, it was like when you went to high school, when you went to the bus, you had to fight. And then when you got to the hallway in school, you have to fight. And then lunchtime, you got to fight. Then you have to fight your way back home. So that's basically the Russians. So their mindset has made them harden. So they know how it feels to be wary of for interference. China had 100 years of humiliation, which is the main tenet of their whole foreign policy is basically never let that happen again. They understand what war, what devastation, what chaos really means because they've experienced it in their history. And unfortunately, the United States has not. And I think this is the reason why America feels like they can go around the world, bomb countries, um, send troops there, because they don't know what war is. They don't know what's like, seeing your child die in a drone strike. Like they don't fathom it because the American public don't care. So I believe it's history that makes Russia and China be like, they don't do what the America does because they understand how it feels when you're being exploited. They know how it feels when invaders come to humiliate you, trying to basically make you be subservient. So that's why the Russian and Chinese, their whole point is like, well, we're just gonna come to these countries and just try to do business, try to develop you, because that's the best way. But the West and the United States have not done that because their whole premise is just war, war, war. In Europe, you would think the Europeans have learned this because they went through how many wars throughout their history. But the European Union and NATO was designed in a way to, one, not make them fight each other, but also two, to be dependent on America. So whatever America says goes. So, but I think it all comes down to a country's history. You have to look at a country's history, see what they went through. And America, we have not experienced real bloodshed and war in our streets since Civil War, and it creates this arrogance where we can just go around bomb and send troops anywhere because we don't know how it feels. And I read an article on that years ago that explains like why is America still in Afghanistan, still in the Middle East after all these years, but there's no uproar in America because the public don't care. It's not affecting them too much. So
Mhm. Yeah, I just want to address a few questions or a few comments in the chat. Reigning Woman, I'm sorry to hear about your channel. I know what it's like to have we know what it's like to have a channel down. So if you want to do some live streams over here, definitely let me know so we can do something. Raul in the chat says, "Did you forget Russian Chechnya conflict? Russia killed many Chechens. Um, China has an imperial history just like Russia has. They both have spilled much blood, way more than the U.S." The point that I was making was that China and Russia has never colonized the continent, and they haven't colonized Latin America. That's a big difference. That's why there's such a desire to work with non non-Western powers, which would be China and Russia. They see them as security guarantors, geopolitically speaking. So that's why there's such a relationship there. I'm not saying that they haven't killed anybody. I'm saying they haven't colonized the continent. That's what they're looking at. They also are looking at what Russia did in Syria as a point of contention to say these guys can actually guarantee my security. So why wouldn't I want to work with them? You know, if they can save Syria, they could probably save us too. And that's probably what the Sudanese leader was saying. Omar al-Bashir was saying in his head, I need help too because my name is on that list of 7 countries in 5 years that General Wesley Clark said in 2007 on Democracy Now with Amy Goodman that this was going to be the game plan, and all of this fits to Israel's benefit. So that's what I'm saying.
and the key thing too is that just like what you said, Mike, they look at it because the way American foreign policy is so erratic in the sense that they support you today, but then they can overthrow you tomorrow. Like if you like what they did, they supported Saddam in the '80s against his war against Iran, and then in the '90s they basically went to war against him, and in 2003 they hung him. You know what I mean? Like American foreign policy is basically we use you for what we need you for, and then when we don't need you anymore, not only we will discard you, but we will destroy you. I mean, they worked with Osama bin Laden in the '80s. I mean, they didn't want to talk about that shit. I mean, the Mujahideen and all that bullshit. Noriega. I mean, like they were working with him too, and then all of a sudden they overthrew him. So these countries, like, dang, like if we work the U.S., like they could work with us for a couple years now, but then out of nowhere they could just say, hey, we're gonna overthrow you because we feel like it. So they look into Russia and China, who are more consistent with their foreign policy, where it's like, listen, we're not going to interfere, we're not going to do this, we're not going to do that, we're just going to help you develop. And then these other countries, but all right, let's use Russia and China as insurance to prevent America coming in, sending the Marines in when they started color revolution. You know what I mean? That they love using that. They love using color revolutions. And then when the government sends, their police out to, crack down on the rioters, then they'll say, oh, human rights are being violated. Let's send the Marines in. So it's more of an insurance policy because American foreign policy is erratic. They support you today, and then tomorrow they discard. Not only do they discard you, they destroy and they discard you and destroy you.
I want to say real quick to CR Frank. Seeing my messages in the chat. Asking for your email. So CR Frank.
You could always put the Brain Trust email there. He should be able to email that.
Okay, yeah, I'll do that.
Let me drop that into the chat.
All right.
Do you want to send him the link?
No, it's for tomorrow because he's into cryptos and I don't know
Okay,
if you
okay.
want to come on the chat or on the chat panel for tomorrow.
Yeah, yeah, just type in the Brain Trust email. He should be able to get to it. If he did you try to put your email in there or something or what?
No, I was asking for his, but he said he wasn't seeing my messages in the chat.
Yeah, he should probably close his browser out and then get back in. Yeah, let me get to this next article. All right, this next one is from the Atlantic. The Russia investigation will continue. Counterintelligence agencies must find it hard to believe the cupboard is already bare. Although Special Counsel Robert Mueller's Russia probe is over, and although President Trump on Friday again described the probe as a witch hunt, the FBI is almost certain to continue its counterintelligence investigation into Russia espionage efforts related to the 2016 election. More, more important, they will continue to search for Americans working on behalf of the Kremlin. The inability to establish that the Trump campaign conspired in a tacit or express agreement with the Russian government is not surprising. Most espionage investigations come up empty unless unless and until they get a lucky break. That does not mean there was no espionage activity in relation to the 2016 election. Every previous Russian political warfare campaign was built on human spies. Russian active measures, propaganda, information warfare, cyber attacks, disinformation, use of foreigners, forgeries, spreading conspiracies and rumors, funding extremist groups, and deception operations rely on human actors to support and inform their success. Counterintelligence professionals must doubt that Russia could have pulled off its election interference effort without support of spies burrowed into U.S. society and institutions. Indeed, troubling patterns, unanswered questions, and tantalizing leads suggest that Russia relied on human sources to interfere in the 2016 election. Both the Mueller report and intelligence community assessments have identified a variety of Russian actors involved in the attack. They uncovered the activities of the Russian GRU, cyber hackers, and the Russian troll factory. However, one key player is missing: Russia's premier espionage service, the SVR. Is it possible that the Russian espionage service played no role in Russia's operation and had no spies helping support the Mueller report, characterized as a sweeping and systematic attack on American institutions? The FBI would be professionally negligent if it assumed so. Consequently, there is still much to uncover, and America's intelligence services will work to uncover it. For example, how did the Kremlin know where to aim its disinformation effort? How did it know which communities to target and which counties and states? One can argue that the Russians had a better sense of where to deploy their resources than did the Clinton campaign. I can't read any more of this. I need a bucket just to get through this. Um, I find this interesting, right? Here you have a country, the United States of America, interfering in the political affairs of Venezuela, and they're talking about the Russians interfering into the U.S. Presidential campaign, despite the fact that the Mueller report says that there's no collusion. So we have to go look for something. So that means we have to make something up. What they tried to do before was say that Black Lives Matter was working in collusion with the Russians. So Black Identity Extremists, or BIE, now being tied in with quote unquote Russian GRU. or the state of Russia as interfering in the elections. You get a twofer out of this if you're a white supremacist, right? If you're a pale-faced Zionist, this is a gift from heaven. You can get rid of the quote unquote communists, and you can get rid of these black people who quote unquote don't know their place, the Negro class. So the FBI is supposed to be impartial, but if you have partial political reference for a certain party, even against a sitting president, that means that this is no more objectively being looked at. This is purposely being looked at from a position of politics. So your agencies are now being politically driven. They're no longer objective.
They were never objective. I mean, look what they did with the Black Panthers. I mean, fucking back then, they feared a black nationalist movement. This so it's like when it comes to white militias, one thing I noticed about federal law enforcement, they throw the kid gloves at them. They throw the kid gloves at them. They do raids when no one is there. They let them grow and ignore them. Meanwhile, with the Panthers, they basically go in, kill leaders, sentence innocent men and women to jail, start internal fighting to, have two groups kill each other like they did in Chicago when Fred Hampton was going to unite all the gangs and have them merge with the Black Panthers, but then they killed that shit by killing him like a thief in the night. But back to the main point of this article, it's so funny. They still on this Russian investigation after Mueller found like nothing wrong. Like, I think it's a combination of things. One, it's a punishment because Trump, when he was running for president, he had the audacity, the gall to say that, you know what, let's just talk to the Russians. Maybe we shouldn't be, enemies of each other. Maybe we could have worked together to fight terrorism and do that sort of thing, which makes sense. I mean, I don't like Trump; he's a buffoon, but in a geopolitical sense, it makes more sense for Russia and the United States to be more closer to each other. That way, there'll be less tension and less chance of nuclear war or conflict. But the deep state, which is all these intelligence agencies, got big mad about that. Got really mad about that shit, and that's why they came up with this whole Russia stole the election. Meanwhile, Hillary Clinton ran a terrible campaign, and she was despised by everyone. Even Democrats had to hold their nose to vote for her. They didn't take that into consideration. No, it's the Russians' fault. Two, there is a there is a need within the intelligence agencies and the defense the defense department to have this have this antagonization against Russia, because one, it's good for defense, the defense contractors, because they can sell more weapons, they can make more weapons because they made a lot of money during the Cold War. And two is just this whole age old um, rivalry with Russia that goes all the way back to Britain. Britain had a rivalry with Russia, I mean, and then France, and then when America became a superpower, they inherited that hatred and towards Russia. So I think it's a culmination of multiple things, but I think that it's just because the United States government is so anti-Russian. Like they are vehemently against Russia. Anything Russia does, it's evil. I mean, Putin tomorrow could say, you know what, uh, world peace is a good thing, or he could say like tomorrow, he could come out tomorrow and say, let's save all the animals about to be extinct. They would say, oh, this is a nefarious thing that Russia's doing. Oh, the Russians are back at it again. Those wily Russians. So I think there's that. Um, uh, but I also want to touch upon that whole BIE piece too. I think it's I think it's also another thing to try to make any criticism against the status quo be seen like, oh, you're working for the Russians. I mean, you see that with ADOS. You have like fucking bitches like Angela Rye saying that, oh, if you are for reparations, you are a Russian agent. Like, it's crazy to see this backlash against ADOS. And I mean, I'm not African American, but I support the ADOS movement because reparations are owed. But to silence the movement because you have no good counterpoint, just say, "Oh, you're working for the Russians." That just shows like if you challenge the status quo, their default defense mechanism say, "Oh, you're working for the Russians." Oh, you're for Black Lives Matter. Okay, you're working for the Russians. Oh, you want reparations. Oh, you work for the Russians. Oh, you want black people to form self defense militias and be into guns. Oh, you're probably working for the Russians. It's used as a way to silence any criticism against the status quo that if you think outside the box, oh, you're working for the Russian GRU. Putin has brainwashed you, and you're watching RT all day. So you are an agent. It's crazy.
Oh yeah, they Anthony Brian Logan on YouTube is on RT too, and he's been to the White House. You think that the intelligence agencies are not knocking on his door saying, "Hey, let's have a conversation with your shiny ass head"?
That's what I'm saying, bro. But it's like they they will do whatever it takes, especially for Black America. Because I seen they use it's crazy because when you think about it, they never use oh you're working for the Russians on the alt right. But when it comes to you know, black groups that are outside of mainstream black media, because mainstream black media is all about oh support the Democrats no matter what, the Republicans are bad, blah blah blah.
Hmm.
But if you are a black man that says, you know what, why should we vote Democrat? Like why can't we, not vote or better yet, hold these politicians accountable so our vote isn't for free. Oh, you're working for the Russians. It's used as it's infuriating because a lot of people will listen to it, they'll believe it, and it will further delegitimize, groups like ADOS or groups like Nation of Islam saying that, oh, they're working for the Russians. I mean, look what they did to Louis Farrakhan on Facebook. They basically removed them off Facebook. They put them in the same category as these alt right groups, which openly speak violence against, black people, and yet you want to show that you're fair and balanced. Nation of Islam is the black KKK. These are the same people that will be saying that, oh, you want reparations, Russian agent. You want black people to get guns, oh, you're a Russian agent. I mean, next thing you know, they're probably gonna. I mean, Mike, they might say the Black Brain Trust is working for Russia, man. I mean, at some point, they're gonna say that to you too, bro. I mean, it's
Oh well, you
bullshit.
know well, there have been people who have come here and said that we are communists. We're socialists and stuff like that. So we've been put in that category a few times before. Dr. Yaya, what's going on? How are you doing? Um, the problem is that America's foreign policy is really just based on racism when it comes to Russia and China. That the Chinese are just stealing things from us, and those Russians, we just can't trust those communist bastards. Despite the fact that communism died in Russia in the Soviet Union in 1991. Um, there's this because remember Dr. Martin Luther King, they called him a communist and said that he was with the Russians. This was J. Edgar Hoover who said this. A matter of fact, he called all the black people Russian communists at the time, and said that the number one terrorist threats in the country, domestically speaking, was African Americans. So at one point, black people were tied in with the Soviet Union, were tied in with communists at one point. The great Paul Robeson was under investigation as well. So what you're seeing now is politicizing black people in conjunction with Russians. Oh, the Russians are doing this, they're doing this, and they're doing that. Well, guess what? When you put sanctions on a country like Cuba, like Venezuela, when you occupy Haiti, when you illegally occupy black neighborhoods with all these MRAPs and all that stuff, you're politically suppressing these people. But the idea that pale-faced people are not interfering in the internal affairs of other nations, and more importantly, politically suppressing black people, that never comes up in the media. No one ever stops and says, well, we're not really occupying Cuba. We just don't. We just wrote into our laws that no one can do business with them, as if your laws extend from the Atlantic Ocean all the way into the Indo-Pacific, into the Mediterranean, and into the Baltic states and stuff like that, all the way into Russia's borders. Like when you can do something like that, that means you're interfering into their internal political affairs. But if someone does that to you, even suspected, you go, you're outraged at this, as if this isn't supposed to happen. Well, guess what? Claiming that Juan Guaido and recognizing Juan Guaido as the interim president to Nicolas Maduro, and saying that Nicolas Maduro is a dictator, but you do business with dictators in the Middle East who kill journalists inside embassies and consulates. How does this work?
Well, it's mind-boggling because just like I said in the previous topic, that American foreign policy is based on, it is based on hypocrisy. And and a great point you said too, that you're suppressing black thought, and that's been that's been going on since day one. Like anytime any black man or woman comes up with any idea that goes against mainstream black thinking, they're extremists. Look what they did with the Nation of Islam. Look what they did with Dr. Khalid Muhammad. They try to make him look like he was like the Black Hitler in the 90s. You know what I mean? Look what they never show black militia groups like the Huey Newton Gun Club or there's other black militias out there. They try to suppress it because they want all black people to be brainwashed into this whole democratic, vote Democrat all the time, be the most faithful base in the Democratic Party. Don't think outside the box because they fear, and that's the key thing. They fear if more black people wake up, all hell will break loose. I mean, that was the main point that they clamped down on the Black Panther Party in the 60s and 70s, was that this fear that if we let this thing grow out, the Black Panthers could have been a black version of Hezbollah, and they would have foreign support. And if that would have happened, then shit would have gone dumb crazy in the streets of America. So they fear that. So in order to prevent all that, they're like, let's suppress black thought. Let's make anyone who questions the status quo look like an extremist, look like a agent working for foreign governments, make them seem like they're out of the ordinary. Like when you look at the Negro Manosphere, for example, like the way YouTube is part of it, it tries to suppress it in the sense that they try to make it look like, oh, this is not mainstream black thought. Like this is we have to suppress this. We cannot let this grow. And you see it on social media too. They try to suppress any mainstream black thought. It's done in a way to make black people asleep in a slumber and not to let them know what's really going on in this country. Like, cause bro, like if you think about foreign countries know that America's bullshit because they're like, how can you say that you support human rights and liberty, and meanwhile you treat black people like this? I think black people don't understand how other countries around the world know the history of what black people went through here, and they kind of perplexed to see like, yo, it's crazy what they doing to y'all. Like y'all being oppressed, but to African Americans here, they think that, oh, this is normal. Like, oh, what we're going through is normal. Because when you look at it from the outside looking in, everything that black people are going through in America is bull. It's just they're being oppressed from the day they were born to the day they die, and and the propaganda that this country does to make black people be in tune with the democratic talking points. The only thing they preach about the "I have a dream" speech of Martin Luther King. They never talk about the People's Campaign, and all that is to keep black people asleep, man. Is to keep black people asleep. And this whole Russian thing is just a new iteration of just trying to suppress independent black thought. Like, look what they did with AD. Look what they're doing with
Well,
ADOS. Mhm.
Raul in the chat says Cuba received nukes from the USSR. What did they expect to happen to them? Castro miscalculated big time. Those nukes could have reached America. Well, you're forgetting the point that the United States put nukes in Turkey. That was a response to put them inside Cuba. They didn't just put them there because it was Tuesday. They put those nukes there because they knew that the Americans had put nukes inside Istanbul. So that's really what the response was. The United States could not handle nukes being 5 minutes away from their borders, so that's what they were worried about. So it wasn't like, oh, they just did it because they didn't have nothing else better to do, and that Castro was stupid. No, Castro knew that in order to secure himself, you had to have nuclear weapons. That's why North Korea in 1949 or 1950 reached out to Russia and Moscow and got nuclear weapons from them, right? So that's where they got their atomic blueprint from.
Let's be real. Let me make this quick
Let
point.
me step away for 5 minutes.
All right, cool, no doubt. So, in regards to Cuba, you have to remember, guys, that the United States was threatening Cuba constantly with invasion, with occupation. The Bay of Pigs situation was just basically hiring Cuban mercenaries from fucking downtown Miami. Say, hey man, we're gonna give you some AR-15s and it's gonna be lit. Don't worry, we're gonna train you, and then the Cuban communist government will fall within a couple hours, and then we good. Like, so Castro had to get nukes in order for a way to be an insurance policy to prevent invasion. Two, just like what Mike said, it all started with them putting nukes in Turkey. Back then, Russia was the Soviet Union. If you look at the map, Russia did border Turkey. Turkey, because if you think about the countries that border Turkey right now, that used to be part of the Soviet Union, was Azerbaijan and Armenia. So putting nukes in Turkey was like if Russia was putting nukes in fucking Mexico or the Bahamas. So that all had to be done to to basically as a response to what America was doing. And what you're seeing today with Venezuela, why Russia's supporting Venezuela, is in the sense that Russia was promised at the collapse of the Soviet Union that NATO was not going to expand eastward. America broke their word. They started accepting a lot of these Eastern European countries into NATO, and that was pushing into Russia's backyard. And the Russians, when they see that you're pushing into my backyard, if you look at Russian history, remember I said earlier about look at the country's history to see what their mindset is at. They've been continuously invaded many times in the history. So when they saw that, like, oh shit, this is NATO trying to accept so many countries into NATO so they can come one day finish the job or start a color revolution, arm an opposition, do an intervention, and then they can reach Moscow and fully destroy Russia. Now, you may say that that's paranoia, that can never happen, but that's how the Russians think because that's their history. So Russia doing this is in response to what the U.S. was trying to do in regards to Ukraine. So, people, you need to know your history, guys. You need to know that what America does is not all goody two shoes. The shit they taught us in history class in high school was all bullshit, bro. Like, America has done a lot of fuck shit, and you have to think outside the box, guys. Come on now.
I stepped away for a second, so I missed a lot of
Oh
the
man, it was good.
dialogue.
Yeah, he laid it down.
Well, because I'm just reading, I'm just catching up with the chat, and it says Raul says that yeah, Mike V, but USSR was a major problem globally because of Stalin. It was to push him back. Stalin wasn't in power at the time, though. It was Khrushchev that was in charge of the USSR at the time. Stalin died in 1953. The Cuban Missile Crisis wasn't until 1963.
Bingo. It was Khrushchev, not Stalin. And before you guys
Yeah.
keep saying that, the Soviet Union was bad, but they killed millions of people. But I hate using whataboutism, but I mean, the U.S. slaughtered millions of Native Americans in the name of manifest destiny. Yes, all countries are bad, but the thing is, America. So see, what the problem is like what Malcolm X says. America puts this image in the world that it's this shining fucking, city in the hill. It's this great country, freedom, democracy, good old America, apple pie. But black people see is all bullshit. Other countries will see is bullshit. America's good at faking that it's a great country, it's a country of democracy and human rights and all that bullshit, but it really ain't. It's like Malcolm said, I have more respect for a man to let me know where he stands than the one who's an angel, but is actually devil. And that's what America is. America puts itself as an angel, but is actually the devil, which is even worse than a man who lets me know where he stands.
All right, let me get to this next article. This one's from AlJazeera.com. Turkey will not bow to U.S. sanctions over S-400, Vice President. Fuat Oktay says U.S. concerns over the Russian-made defense system are not reasonable, adding Ankara will not back down. Turkey will never bow to U.S. sanctions over its agreement to buy Russian S-400 defense systems. Turkey Vice President Fuat Oktay said on Sunday in reference to the deal that has strained ties between the NATO allies. Washington has said the S-400 could compromise the capabilities of F-35 fighter jets, for which it has a separate deal with with Turkey, and warned of possible U.S. sanctions if Ankara pushed on with the Russian deal. Ankara has said the S-400 and F-35s would not affect each other and that it will not abandon the former. Speaking in an interview with broadcaster Canal 7, Oktay said the United States' concern on the issue were not reasonable and added that Turkey would not back down. Oktay's comments come after acting U.S. Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan warned Friday that the Pentagon will halt manufacturing support for F-35 in Turkey if Ankara buys Russian missile defense systems. If Turkey decides that the S-400 decision is a decision that they want to go forward with, then we have to move work out of Turkey, he said. Shanahan noted that he had met delegations from U.S. aerospace manufacturers Lockheed Martin and United Technologies to discuss options if Turkey refuses to forego the S-400. As a member of NATO, Turkey is taking part in the production of the fighter jet for use by members of the treaty and has plans to buy 100 of the jets itself. A number of Turkish manufacturers are making parts and equipment for the F-35, including internally carried standoff missiles, airframe assemblies, and wiring, leaving the NATO program partially dependent on them. Washington has placed a freeze on the joint manufacturing operations with Turkey and has suggested that Turkey might be able to obtain a U.S. missile defense system if it foregoes one offer from Moscow. But Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has insisted that he will buy the Russian system. Turkey's not backing down. This wouldn't have happened 10 or 15 years ago, right? You don't back then before Obama came into office, right after 9/11, and even maybe prior to 9/11, you wouldn't have seen many of these countries talking about, I'm not backing down, I'm not listening to you. I'll fire my missiles where I want. I'll buy what I want. I'll fly my planes where I want. Now you have, North Korea launching missiles whenever they feel like it. China pretty much saying that we'll sail our ships and do business where we feel like it. Russia basically saying we're in the Middle East and we're not backing down. Iran saying we'll enrich nuclear energy if we feel like it. Um, Turkey saying we're not backing down. We're not afraid of sanctions. Europe basically saying we're going to have to come up with an alternative um, mechanism to the international payment system to work with Iran. This wasn't happening, 10, 15 years ago. You didn't see this kind of pushback.
Exactly. It's crazy to see how fast the acceleration of America's decline is going. I think the biggest issue is because the Trump administration's whole policy is like, if you don't, it is basically my way or the highway diplomacy. Like, if you don't do what we say, we're going to sanction you. But what it's going to do is going to hurt the U.S. dollar because America's dollar is basically its most powerful weapon that it has because all businesses are done in dollars. It's a world reserve currency. Basically, America, well, with its dollars, the big dog in town. But all these policies are doing is to make you know trade outside of the U.S. dollar more relevant and make the U.S. dollar irrelevant, if you know what I mean. And the crazy thing is, in regards to Iran, John Kerry warned about this thing too. He said, like, listen, I think I have to send you the video, Mike. He openly said it. He said, listen, the Iran nuclear deal, if it fails, like if the U.S. were to pull out on it and were to start a conflict with Iran, that would be the end of the U.S. Of the U.S. dollar as a world reserve currency, because other nations will see that the U.S. pull out of a deal, it starts sanctioning Iran. Countries are doing business with Iran, Europeans, Chinese, Russian, and you're sanctioning them. They're gonna be like, okay, you're wilding right now. We need to wean off this U.S. dollar. I think this is all coming at a time that uh, and this happens to all great empires in the past. Like when they're declining, mind you, when Trump ran, that's what his whole point was make America great again. He was selling the fact that America's declining, we have to bring America back. When empires declining, they look at the good old days, say we need to bring back those good old days because that's when we're more powerful. And what usually happens is
Make
they
America great
accelerate
again.
the decline. They accelerate the decline, and that's what we're seeing right now.
You mean make America great again?
Yeah. Make America great again. So that whole premise was just like, we want to bring the way America was back in the fucking, I don't know what era, like the 1950s, 60s, or whatever. So there's that. And I think also too is a lot of countries just see America's weak, man. Like it's not, it doesn't have the juice anymore. I keep saying this. America's like it's like LeBron James right now in the Lakers, man. Like they used to be dominant or whatever, but you're starting to see it slow down. Starting to see it slow down, and age and 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 age is catching up on LeBron, and that's the same thing with America. America had a few injuries in Afghanistan, had a few injuries in Iraq and shit. Nobody respects them anymore, but they're trying to show that they're still the man. That America is going to keep playing hard, keep playing 48 minutes until one day they're going to blow out their ACL or blow out their Achilles tendon. And I think all of this is just showing nobody really respects America, nobody fears them, and America with this Trump administration is hurting itself, sanctioning its allies. Like you're trying to, like they're trying to sanction India for buying Russian weapons. They put sanctions on China for buying Russian weapons, and then now they're putting sanction on these companies for working with Iran. Like yo, you're making your greatest weapon meaningless at this point because now you see all these countries that are trying to do business outside of that dollar. So it, it's going to be interesting when historians look back at this time. They probably look back and say, yeah, this is when all this shit started falling apart.
Hmm. All right, just wanted some face-to-face Africa. Four major cities in Africa still holding on to their colonial names. Names are significant components of identification that communicate, among other things, cultural and religious reasons why they were chosen. Places could be identified by names related to the activity that is most dominant in the area or connote a historical or cultural event that is consistent with the place. In Africa, societies places name place names were not chosen on random whims. Apart from giving these places an identity and helping distinguish one community from another, names of places were carefully selected to communicate meaning and significance to people. Place names were deeply rooted in the cultural identity of Africans. Names given to places communicated the culture of the communities that occupied it. We talked about cultural identity or cultural intelligence on Sunday, so that's a new hangout that we have. Make sure y'all check that out. Unfortunately, what Europeans started exploring, when Europeans started exploring the continent and eventually colonizing the continent, most of these places underwent name changes because the colonizers could not pronounce the original names. Colonization took away the original names of value by either distorting its pronunciation or totally replacing it with new exotic names, thus taking away the historical and cultural significance of these places. Although it has been decades since most of the countries on the continent gained independence, some of some of its major cities continue to hold on to their colonial names, and here are some of the cities. The name Johannesburg is surrounded by many controversies regarding its origin. Some history documents say it was named after Johann Friedrich Bernhard Rizieck and Christian Johannes Joubert. However, many theories have come up to contradict this finding, with the view that many people bearing the name Johannes held positions of importance in the Zuid I can't even pronounce that. Zuid Afrikaans Republic, or were involved in the events leading up to the founding of the town. Precise record of the origin of the name is still unknown. The city rose to prominence following the discovery of gold in June 1884. That's interesting. Nigeria's largest and former capital city, and also the largest city on the continent in terms of population, was formerly called Eco, and sometimes referred to as Onmin, Onim. Eco, which translates to war or military camp, was named by the Awari people, who were the occupants of the land before the arrival of the Portuguese. The name was changed to Lagos by the Portuguese, who named it after the coastal city in southern Portugal. The Portuguese used the place as a port for the slave trade in the 1760s. Up until 1991, Lagos was the capital city of Nigeria. Nonetheless, it remains the country's economic powerhouse. Founded as Rabat, which means camp, the city of Rabat was founded by Abdul Mamin in the 12th century as a fortified monastery where he could keep his soldiers during the jihad in Spain. Due to its military significance, it acquired the name uh, Rubantu Fat, which translates to stronghold of victory. It is one of the four regal cities located in the Atlantic coast at the mouth of the Wadi Bol Regreg, opposite of the city Sale. The city of Rabat was later corrupted by the French to be Rabat after invading Morocco and establishing a proctorate in 1912. The city attracted settlers as far back as the 8th century before Christ. Gaucha from the Ikari, borrowed from Igbo, is the former name of one of the largest metropolitan cities in Nigeria, Port Harcourt. It means bright skyline in Igbo. Port Harcourt is the largest city of Rivers State. The area of the farmlands of the Daibo village of the Igari people, a subpeople of the Igbo tribe, ethnic group. Sorry. The colonial administration created the port in 1912 to transport coal from Enugu. In 1913, Lord Lugard named the port after Louis Vernon Harcourt, who was Secretary of State of the colonies at the time. Whoa. I guess you learn something new every day. Zoe, you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, bro, it's crazy to see that all these countries still have like the Western names from their colonial masters. And it also shows how, how bad colonialism, how deep the effects of it is. I'll say that slavery and colonialism has done a number in the mind of Black people worldwide. It has. It is just that uh, the way colonialism work is that they come to your country, they shit on your heritage, and try to civilize you in, in quote unquote, they try to civilize you in their way, because your way of civilization was the way of barbarians. They try to remove your identity, and that's why these Africans are still hung up on loving that. I mean, not all, but most will they see the white man as superior. I got a homeboy of mine who's Nigerian, and he goes back to Nigeria all the time, and he says, like, you know, Nigerians, look down on each other, but if a white man comes through, a white man, white woman come through, they will treat him like, like, they won the fucking Super Bowl, like they I wouldn't say they throw a parade, but they just see them as the standard. And you see, and it's like that quote Russia's that not Russia, that Putin said, all these successful Africans, they send their kids, to schools in Europe. They get the best jobs in Europe. They go to Dubai, do the shopping, but then all they do, and at the end of the day, what they send to Africa is just, that's where they get buried. And it's the same thing that goes on in Haiti as well. So, uh, it it just shows colonialism. It's going to take a while for Black people to shake it off. Like, I'm optimistic. Black people just got a lot of those African countries. They got their independence like 60 years ago. Okay, so give them time. It's going to take them a while for them to get away from that, colonialist, white supremacist mindset that they have towards each other. And stop seeing, they'll stop seeing Europe as the standard, which is the biggest problem that a lot of Africans have. And it's the same thing with the Haitians too. Who unfortunately, there's a lot of Haitians who, you know They still think, white is right. You know what I mean? They think that black people can never get anything right. They always think that Haitians can never get anything right. Look at these white countries doing so well. Meanwhile, the reason why these European countries have wealth is because they stole from those same African countries. But it's crazy to see that all these cities that originally had the natives' names, like the Africans there, and it was just you know uh, got renamed by their colonial masters, and now when they broke away from colonialism, they still hold on to the names. It's it just goes to show that colonialism is not only the physical thing you see. It's not colonialism is not just Europeans bringing guns and saying that we own this land. It's a psychological thing. So,
That goes into the cultural intelligence that we talked about on Sunday. If you all have not checked out that hangout, I advise you to do so. We did some scientific breakdowns of cultural intelligence. So myself in complex design. One of the things that I find interesting is that, well, I was going to say Coonerians because of some of the coonery that goes on over there. Don't get me started on African women dating white men, man. Um, I would argue that, and I would agree with you, but I would also argue that African Americans are pretty much colonized as well. You can look at their first and last names. You see the colonialism in their namesake. So. Um, a lot of black people are not really taking into consideration how colonized they are. Uh, you don't need um, you don't need a military occupying force to really tell that story. You can see it in Black Americans' behavior, and how they think and how they move and how they get down and what they believe in. You got brothers on YouTube talking about the KKK gave their grandmother gifts. Um, and they're appearing on panels,
wait,
talking
wait.
about
I heard that. Wait. I heard that today because C Boogie he had a hangout and he mentioned that, and now you mentioned it. I
oh
mean, I
man,
don't want you to say names, but it's like that really happened. Like, so it's somebody really said that on a hangout. Like the
that was recent.
KKK
That
gave.
wasn't not too long ago.
I keep talking, Mike.
No, I was saying that was recent because that wasn't that long ago that this brother had mentioned this, that the KKK brought his grandmother gifts. I just find that to be mind-boggling. So when we talk about colonialism, it's not just Africans who have been colonized. A lot of African Americans are just as colonized, if not just if not worse. Um, you're seeing this all over the manosphere and even on YouTube, some parts of YouTube. There's a lot of colonized Negroes that need to be called out for who they really are and what they stand for, because they really don't they really should not share the same uh, broadcast space with the rest of us. It's not fair that people who are really doing the work on the ground, I do a lot of solidarity work with Haitians and Palestinians and so on and so forth. And some of the stuff that we talk about, man, I don't see brothers, the same brothers talking about the KKK brought their grandmother gifts. I don't see those brothers putting in the same amount of work that we put in.
Exactly, bro. Exactly. But that's why I appreciate the Black Brain Trust because it's you, like the whole premise of the Black Brain Trust is self improvement, and that's the thing I can get on. That's why I support brothers like C Boogie because they're on that self improvement. Because the Black Brain Trust is to get your mind right, to get your money right, get your career right. It's brothers are taking this for granted because this is free information. Like, bro, like when you guys have those Friday nights when you talk about the economy, I'm just listening. I'm just soaking it in because it's like you guys are giving us so much free information on what's coming down the pike, what jobs to look for, what stocks to invest in. Well, I mean, you always say that. You always say the disclaimer that you're not financial advisors, but you guys trying to help brothers to understand. That listen, it's just not you can't only just say, listen, I'm gonna try to get a job or try to get a job with good benefits and you're good. Nah, there's more out there to learn. There's so much information and just try to improve, the average black man to live up to his greatest potential. Because, the average black man has not. We have so much potential, you know. Worldwide, we are resilient. We are resilient people. If there's one thing we can say about Black people worldwide, whether from Haiti, from the United States, Canada, Africa, we are resilient people because I mean, I don't want to, shit on, the Native Americans, but let's be real. Like when they were colonized in the Western Hemisphere, they got wiped out. But when they try to do that to Africa, they couldn't wipe us out because we're too resilient, we're too strong. And the great thing about the Black Brain Trust is trying to encompass, trying to fix the mentality of the Black man. And that Sunday night hangout, I wanted to go, but I was doing something else. I was studying for final exams, but you guys are trying to fix the whole Black man. You're trying to show that the Black man can live up to his full potential. You know what I mean? You cannot just only talk about sex. You can't just talk about. I mean, sex is important, but it cannot be the thing that drives you. Self improvement is. Getting your mind right, get your money right. As Nagon says, get your mind right, get your body right. So, um, I think this is all. I think the Black Brain Trust, what you're doing, Mike, is basically trying to make Black men trying to eliminate the white supremacist in his mind. Because BGS said it. He said, like, listen, if you want to take down white supremacy, you have to eliminate the white supremacist that you look in the mirror. And I think Black men, especially because we're men, we have to lead the community. We have not done that. We see each other in the eyes of the white man, and we despise each other. We fear each other. We try to tear each other down. We try to see that white is right, and that's why I appreciate this platform because it's like you guys talk about so many different topics throughout the week and for free too, trying to help brothers live up to the best potential. And to me, that is dope. That is dope because we need that. We need, especially where the world is heading towards to, because we're at a critical juncture, and this next industrial revolution is not going to be pretty, and Black people need to get their shit together if we can make it through that that next industrial revolution.
Yeah, we could also put feminism in there as a form of colonialism over Black women's minds, as a special form of colonialism. A lot of Black women fell for the trick bag with feminism and don't realize they have been colonized now and have been weaponized against Black men. So, no one is safe from this. Colonialism is something that is a top-down approach to geopolitics as well as culture. So that's why we talk about cultural intelligence, and that's why we talk about geopolitics because all of that is important and encompasses all of this, all of what we do. So uh, part of the part of the political discussions on here is for decolonialization, not from a military standpoint, but from a spiritual standpoint and from a mental standpoint. So trying to get you to see things from a different perspective so that you're not walking around um you're not walking around ignorant, so and colonized for
Exactly,
that matter.
exactly,
Especially
and
especially these shines that are running around YouTube talking about the KKK gave their grandmother gifts. Those are shines.
nigga, I can't believe that shit, bro. Like on some real shit. Like I heard C Boogie mention it today at his hangout, and I was like, I mean, I heard it first. I was like, yeah, I probably heard something wrong, whatever. And when you mentioned it, I was like, oh shit, this shit is like some real deal bullshit. Some nigga really said that, and it goes to show how deep colonialism is in. It has ingrained the minds of our people, bro. Like we unfortunately, a lot of our people see us through the eyes of white people, of white supremacists, and it's gonna take a lot to clear our mind from that shit.
Yeah, you're gonna have there's a lot of feedback coming from somebody who just joined us. Oh, DE, what's going on, brother? You're gonna have a lot of pushback because it's not normal for the most part, to decolonize yourself. So even Ronan Black said in the chat, gentrification is an updated, modified version of colonial colonization occurring in the urban Black community. Look at Harlem. Political Negro talking heads are dead ass silent about it. So gentrification is an American term, but the United Nations would classify that as internally displaced people. So there should be some form of international observers on the ground looking at all this stuff. And I think the United Nations did volunteer to send people down to St. Louis and Chicago to look at what the police were doing. The United States pushed back against that. I think this was under Trump or something like that. They had pushed back against all of this stuff. It was like that won't be happening. So
And the thing with gentrification is basically a form of ethnic cleansing, as you said, Mike. I mean, I'm from Brooklyn, so Brooklyn is being gentrified like no other, man. Like you see these white folks coming in. So here's the game how it goes down, man. And my pops told me this,
mhm.
and a lot of people in real estate tells how this really went down, how gentrification started in the '90s. Like for example, if a building, if so, what they would do is they'll go to an apartment building or to a house, and they'll tell the owner like, "Yo, we're gonna give you this cash, give up, give up the your property." And many owners said no. So what would happen is a lot of these buildings, bro, they went up in flames, man. They went up in flames. Mysteriously, there would be fires, man. People from New York will know what I'm talking about. There would like these mysterious fires that would happen, like these buildings would go up into flames, and then well, when the building goes into flames, they tear them down to build condos. And right now, they tear down these old buildings and they build up these new condos, raise the rent in the local area to displace these people. And yet, no one bats an eye in the United States. And that's part, like you said, that's part of colonialism, man. You're driving these people out because the whole goal of gentrification across this country is to push black people from the urban centers, send them to the suburbs, cut them off from all types of resources, from all the jobs, and let them die. Basically, they're just sending us to the suburbs where we will die because the future is not in the suburbs; it's in the cities. Kind of like what they do to blacks and Arabs in France. Send them to the suburbs and the outskirts, where if they want to go to work, work is like a fucking 1 hour, 1 hour or 1 hour and a half drive, and there's no resources, there's no police or nothing. So basically, it's kind of organized ethnic cleansing in a sense. So this shit is deep.
Yeah, I want to get to this next article real quick. This one is from chargeaffairs.org. Globalization with Chinese characteristics. Italy recently made the news with the announcement that it has decided to join China's Belt and Road Initiative (BRI), making it the first G7 nation to do so. The BRI has become one of China's signature foreign policy and economic initiatives. Many states in Central and South Asia, as well as some in Africa, have accepted Chinese investment and infrastructure spending, often in exchange for large debt loads or adherence to China's geopolitical ideals, such as the One China policy rule. That's just an image of China's ambitions through the Belt and Road Initiative. So the orange represents the one road economies, and the blue represents the one belt economies, and then green represents mainland China. So the colonialization through economics. At the same time, the world is heading towards another multipolar era of great power competition. China is on the road to be one of the next great powers alongside the United States. As China increases its soft power initiatives, especially through its flagship BRI, the United States must be prepared to increase its investments abroad beyond traditional trade agreements to preserve its influence. This must be done in order to secure a level playing field for the time when great power competition resumes. The BRI consists of two major components: the Silk Road Economic Belt and the Maritime Silk Road. The former is the land route between China and Europe via Central Asia, while the latter is as its name suggests, the sea route that runs through the Indian Ocean and Red Sea. The primary buzzword that Beijing would like to associate with the BRI's connectivity is connectivity. Namely, the Chinese government wants to increase the connectivity and trade capacity between Europe and China. The first step in increasing the connection to is to expand the land infrastructure and port capacity of the countries along the way. At first, at first glance, this seems like a win-win scenario. China becomes more connected to Europe, and developing states, along with the BRI routes, get new infrastructure investment. However, there have been concerns raised over certain aspects of the BRI, particularly the debt that many states have incurred in completing BRI projects. After accepting Chinese help in financing the expansion of the Hambantota port, Tota port in Sri Lanka, the Sri Lankan government was forced to turn control of the port over to Chinese interests when it could no longer repay its debts. More recently, several states originally preparing to start BRI projects have postponed or canceled these projects due to concerns over financing and the debt load with which these projects are saddled with their economies. Increased scrutiny of BRI's lending has been a major source of the backlash. China has advertised its BRI lending as no strings attached, which was in contrast to the loans from Western lenders that contain conditionalities such as corruption controls and sustainability requirements. However, the initial results of the BRI investing are indicating that this no strings attached approach creates more opportunities for corruption in the misuse of funds. As a reaction, states such as Kenya and Malaysia have seen their votes hold their governments accountable or responsible for increased corruption from BRI projects by voting the responsible parties out of office. Western alternatives to the BRI do exist in the form of organizations such as the IMF and the World Bank. As mentioned, though, loans from these entities often come with anti corruption and sustainability conditions that can be difficult for developing nations to meet, hence, their initial attraction to the BRI funds. The United States has programs such as USAID and the African Growth and Opportunity Act to promote lending and investing towards states in the path of the BRI. Again, their help comes with conditionalities that might be difficult to quickly fulfill. The recent pushback against the BRI provides the United States with an opportunity to increase its influence. While Trans-Pacific Partnership would have been a good way to promote economic bloc to counter China, the Trump administration decision to withdraw from the agreement has left the United States out in the cold. Soft power influence is crucial to the United States' ability to influence and partner with other states without the use of military force. However, there are other ways to counter Chinese influence. The Trump administration favors bilateral trade agreements over regional. Multilateral agreements, such as TPP, in increase and individualize outreach to states, whether through bilateral trade agreements or tailored aid packages in the path of the BRI would be a good way to gain influence in Africa and Central Asia. What's interesting about this is that the article kind of points out that the United States should somehow offer financial assistance to these countries and whatnot, and build these sort of trade lanes and whatnot. The problem with that is you have a lot of failing infrastructure in the United States that has not been attended to. So, who do you think? Why would you invest now when you could have invested before? And when you could have invested before, you didn't do it in your own country. So why would you do it in somebody else's country? It just seems like these are reactionary policies that are taking place in regards to China's Belt and Road Initiative. China built up their own country before building up everybody else's, and then they went out and started making deals with everybody else. Whereas in the United States, they kind of destroyed everybody's countries, and then went back to their own and didn't bother to rebuild their own countries. You see in the United States there are 8,000 bridges that are considered condemned or unusable, right? Or close to condemned. So what you have is bridges that can potentially fall apart, and you have a lot of bridges that have lead paint on them. So you had people, kids traveling across these bridges at some point. They had a lot of those toxic chemicals, you know, um, absorbed into their system. This is a form of environmental racism.
Exactly. You know, it's too late for the U.S. to even do their own Belt Road Initiative. I mean, one, there's so much bad blood. I mean, if the U.S. says, "Hey, we're going to try to develop these countries," people are going to look at it like, "Really, you're only doing this, bro, because China's doing it. So you're not really doing this out of I wouldn't say out of the goodness of your heart, but you're only doing this to try to counter China, which means like you really ain't committed to this. If your heart's not into it, I mean, it's kind of like with something. Like if your heart is not into something, it's not going to work out well. And another point you made, Mike, is how the U.S. infrastructure is terrible. So if you before you even fix a country, you got to fix your own country. I mean, how much is I think I read some of the recent estimate to fix America's total infrastructure will cost about $2 to $3 trillion. Like that's a lot of money. I mean, you already wasted $6 trillion in the Middle East. Like you you you're gonna have to first fix the infrastructure before you even come around here telling me, oh, you're gonna build subways. Like all the people in the chat who are from New York, you know how shitty the MTA is because the infrastructure, the subway infrastructure in New York City is falling apart like right before our eyes, and the cities and the state ain't doing nothing much. So if New York City, which is quote unquote the capital of the world, if its subway system is collapsing, that says a lot about your country in a sense, because that major metropolitan area represents your represents the image of your nation. So it's too late for the U.S. to do anything. I think the U.S. would never do this. They're going to only depend on one thing only, which is try to sanction China. You see with the trade deal talks falling apart. Um, they're trying to get their way with China. They're trying to somehow stymie the continual rise of China. Try to stop one belt, one road initiative. Um, they're only using the only weapon they have left, which is the dollar. And even then, like I said earlier, they're only accelerating their own decline. And two, they can't use force because if you try to use force, if you try to use war, mm, it can really blow back in your face. So I don't know what Trump is doing right now is just like the last hurrah of a declining empire trying to, do whatever they can to slow down the growth of China, but it's failing in all fronts because all it's doing is making the U.S. dollar irrelevant. And in regards to infrastructure, hey man, fix those subways, bro. Like your subways are shit. You got rats and all that shit in the subways. Like if you're gonna go to Africa try to build subway systems, nah, you gotta fix the subway system in your own country. You know what I mean?
I don't think they have any intentions on actually building any infrastructure in any other places. I think what they're trying to do is offer better trade deals than what China is offering on the table. The problem is that African countries can't afford U.S. goods to begin with. So the trade relationship between Africa and the United States is dismal in comparison to what Europe or I shouldn't say Europe, but Southeast Asia does, especially China. So China does, um, close to $1 trillion in trade with by 2020, 2022 with Africa, whereas the United States only does about 100 billion. And a lot of that stuff is Africans having to sell goods to the United States, but Africa not really buying anything for the United States in return. Um, so there's very little export. I think this is a perfect opportunity for Black Americans to actually engage in bilateral trade with the continent. A lot of cocoa, a lot of natural resources that are grown and on the continent can actually be imported by way of African Americans, and then we can actually export some of our goods over there as well, such as the textiles and um, other cultural sort of cultural goods that can be exported over there. Because I see Africans all the time. I'm not going to sit up here in front. I see Africans all the time trying to emulate hip hop artists in America, and they go to Europe and they try to say, oh, oh yeah, I'm an African American. Oh yeah, 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 right. And they try to portray the swag of an African American, but they can't do it right because they have the thick accent and whatnot. So they come off looking like kind of goofy. But for the most part, I think these are big opportunities for African Americans to really take advantage of. But in order for something like this to happen, you need to be organized. And as if the manosphere is any indicator of what's going on, I doubt if Black people are that organized. So the organization has to take place first.
I think Stokely Carmichael said it once that black people know how to mobilize, but they don't know how to get organized. Like that's the key problem. And like what you said about the manosphere, the manosphere just symbolizes Black America in the in, in a sense chaotic niggas yelling at each other, talking over each other, only care about fuckery, no room for intelligent conversation. And when there is intelligent conversation, someone comes in and tries to derail it with some buffoonery and too many distractions. In regard to the trade deals, uh, I don't. I think uh, the problem with these trade deals, and I think the biggest problem is that Africans, I would hope, and I would imagine there's some who will think like this. I mean, Trump just called your country shithole countries. You're really going to do trade with a country that for years supported your former colonial masters. Basically they bailed them out in World War I and World War II to continue your oppression. Two, you see what they're doing to your black brothers and sisters. I mean, let's just be real. Africans are not stupid. They know what the U.S. is all about. They understand that they understand that how America operates. So I don't think they would fall for this. They would. They see China's deal is better because China is bringing development. Africa needs development. They don't only need trade; they need technology. They need development. If you're going to do free trade deals with America, all that's going to do is kill your own industry. I can speak that in Haiti, that's what's going on. It's not only Haiti; it goes on to a lot of countries in the Caribbean where they do these trade deals with the U.S. and cheap American. Well, I won't say cheap, but these American companies come in and they kill your local economies. They kill your local economies, and then they raise the price of goods on you. And like for example, in Haiti, Haiti can grow like Haiti's land is so fertile that it can grow rice, but there's no Haitian rice companies anymore because a lot of the rice is coming from the United States, and they charge it up the ass on the Haitian people. So it's like it's destroying your economy in one sense.
Yeah, I'm always surprised to see people not want to talk about neocolonialism by pale faced people as if this is a good thing. You should want this, right? You should want European values in your culture, as if Africans somehow needed Europeans to survive. And in reality, Africans were doing greater things 1,000 years before the Europeans even got there. What's going on, De?
Good night. I'm good. Good night, everybody.
What's going on,
Oh,
brother?
good evening, rather.
You have anything you want to add?
Oh, yeah. Um, this is a strategic move. It It's not perfect, but it's okay because it is like one of the, I would say, three moves that the U.S. had because um, if the U.S. can negotiate with, say, Italy instead of the whole EU, then it's going to get a better deal because Italy cannot outproduce the U.S. and Italy needs the U.S. economy for survival. But if you're negotiating with the EU, then Italy is not in dire need of the U.S. economy because the EU now can trade with China, Russia, or any other country that it chooses as a bloc. So what the U.S. is doing is trying to kind of like separate countries. That's why you see what's happening with Brexit. They're trying to separate countries, and if they can keep Africa, especially, from becoming one Africa, if they can keep that 54 country from becoming Africa, Africa of the future, not Africa of the past, then it's going to be like a pretty big roadblock in the path of China. Because now it's like France. Every one of France's colonies, France has the first right of refusal for anything that they want to build, you know, and that's written into, I guess, every Frenchman want to be in Africa. Is bring he unless he gonna if he's gonna be in the government, that's he's got to sign that contract with France saying this is what you're going to do. And if the U.S. can keep African countries from doing that with France or do it with China or do it with Russia, then they got a leg up in stopping China from going. They can't stop China altogether, but they can slow it down.
All right, let me get to this next article. This one is from Curious.com. Is India on course to be a NATO ally? Let's find out. It's good to have friends, NATO Secretary General told the U.S. Congress on the eve of treaties 70th on the eve of the treaty's 70th anniversary. 1 week later, a group of U.S. lawmakers introduced a bill to designate India as a NATO ally. A week after the World War II era North Atlantic Treaty Organization celebrated its 70th anniversary, U.S. lawmakers led a bipartisan attempt to elevate India as a NATO ally, reintroducing key legislation in the House of Representatives. The bill will have to pass the House and Senate before the President gives the final go ahead. However, if enacted, the legislation will ensure that the U.S. State Department treats India as a non-member NATO ally for the purpose of Arms Export Control Act. Here's what happened. A group of half a dozen influential Republican and Democratic representatives came together in a bid to advance the U.S.-India strategic relationship, a news report said Friday. The original co-sponsors of the legislation are Congressman Amit Bera, the long-serving Indian American in the U.S. Congress, along with the House Indian Caucus co-chairs Congressman George Holding and Brad Sherman, Congressman Ted Yoho, and Congresswoman with a 2020 running ticket, Tulsi Gabbard, were also among its sponsors. I'm surprised Tulsi Gabbard would pull something like this. On Monday, April 8th, the bill, H.R. 123, was introduced by Republican Congressman Joe Wilson, who is a senior member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. It seeks to send a powerful signal that defense sales to India should be prioritized as per the U.S. India Strategic Partnership Forum, which has worked on this important legislation. This comes a few days after a U.S. Armed Services Committee hearing, where Assistant Defense Secretary Randall Shriver deemed India's decision to purchase the Russian S-400 air defense system as an unfortunate decision. Shriver added, "We are keen to see them, India, make an alternative choice. We're working with them to provide potential alternatives. The S-400 has become a thorn in the U.S. relations with seven decades old NATO ally Turkey as well, as Ankara is openly defying U.S. wishes on the Russian-made weapon purchase. India already enjoys a special status as a major defense partner to the U.S. by virtue of the National Defense Authorization of 2017. The proposed legislation follows the NDA, NDAA, which has together, when taken together, would reflect the long way that India-U.S. relations have come since the Cold War. Where India fits in NATO's scheme of things. While NATO shifted radically after the fall of the USSR, its future was never as seriously questioned as it has been since the arrival of the U.S. President Donald Trump, who has called the alliance obsolete, casting the future of the U.S. involvement in the group into doubt. He has also complained about the bulk of NATO's budget being funded by the U.S., resulting in a landmark resolution to withdraw the U.S. from the organization, put to a vote that lost 357 to 22. Meanwhile, the alliance itself has grown from 12 countries in 1949 to 29 members in 2019, with approximately 20,000 military personnel deployed across the world at present. NATO's defense commitments overseas have evolved from fighting communism to Islamic extremism, with its pause in conflicts like Kosovo, Afghanistan, Mediterranean waters, and Iraq, especially after 9/11. But with the talks of demilitarization of Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan on the table, NATO is quite possibly eyeing bigger fish. The unprecedented challenges now facing NATO and global security at large, including the shifting balance of global power, artificial intelligence, and innovation in cyberspace that aid terrorism. We see a pattern of Russian behavior, including massive military buildup from the Arctic to the Mediterranean and from the Black Sea to the Baltic. The use of military grade nerve agent in the United Kingdom, support for Assad's murderous regime in Syria, consistent cyber attacks on NATO allies and partners targeting everything from parliaments to power grids, sophisticated disinformation campaigns, and attempts to interfere in democracy itself. You saw on April 3rd, tensions with Russia are definitely returning to Cold War era levels. Basically, India is probably 15 minutes away from China. Let me see if I can pull up a map because it's probably better to do something like that. Let me pull this up real quick. Anyways, the point that I'm trying to make here is that India shares a border with China. So, giving India a NATO status creates a huge tripwire to China in its mobility in the Belt and Road Initiative and its Silk Road Initiative. So what's going to happen here is that China is going to react immediately. Giving India NATO status or making India a NATO partner is the equivalent of making Ukraine a NATO partner on the border with Russia. Russia already said that they won't tolerate that, and that will set off a war immediately. Putin has already said this last summer that if he wanted to take Ukraine, he would take it in 2 weeks. So this is the sort of volatility that comes out of talking about certain states joining NATO. That's a big no-no in a lot of countries. In a lot of countries' foreign policy, they won't tolerate that. So when you talk about India joining NATO and thinking that China is just going to be quiet about that, they'll do something about that immediately. They'll either stop bombing ports or you know, they'll run right across that border that they share with India, which is very porous, to say the least, because it's not very well defended.
Yeah, I think the key thing is India has close relations with Russia, so I don't see Russia taking that very well. That one of their closest allies, India, would even consider joining NATO, and I would imagine the Indians realize that if they join NATO, that could set things off because the the main issue with India and it is the fact that they have Pakistan in the west and then they have China in the east, and they fear fighting a two-front war. So if India considered getting NATO status, they could find themselves fighting a two-front war with Pakistan in the west and China in the east, and their military, although their military is pretty decent, cannot handle fighting a two-front war in that regard. Just like you said, this is a tripwire trying to stop China's Belt and Road Initiative. But I think I would imagine that Russia would tell India, like, listen, chill, please don't do that, because it would not benefit India in the sense that India would be surrounded by hostile powers. They'll be
Who those
surrounded
hostile
by.
powers be?
Hmm.
Who would those who would be those hostile powers?
It would be China and Pakistan. Like if they consider getting NATO status, that would put a huge target on the back because it's like what you said. China would start bombing ports. They'll also have Pakistan start to antagonize India in the east. It will create a major crisis. So this idea of expanding NATO to India is very short-sighted, and it could just blow up in the face, literally, the face of the Western powers. I would imagine the Indians don't want to do this. India's whole policy was during the Cold War was to be neutral. Like they didn't want to get involved with, you know, they didn't want to get involved in the Cold War. They're like, listen, yeah, we are a huge country, but yo, let's just focus on us. Y'all can fight it out, but we good over here. Although they have a closer relation with Russia, but I don't. I think this would be a terrible idea. This could potentially lead to a major conflict if that is true. Um, uh, I don't see the only benefit from the Western perspective is try to stop China's Belt One Road initiative, but they're not calculating how China will respond, and I think that's a problem. They're not calculating that because China
Actually,
will
they
not.
have calculated it. Actually, they have calculated it. That's why they're making that move. Because there's been rumors about Japan joining NATO as well. They're not stupid. They know exactly what they're doing. And the other rumors is that India wants to offer Japan uh, Indian Ocean, and Japan would offer Indian presence in Japan as well, which is why they want those islands back from Russia, and that they're not going to get. Putin already said you're not getting those back. So unless you sign a peace treaty, and even then you're not going to get those islands back. So there's all types of maneuvers going on as we speak. as to how to integrate Japan and India into NATO, as well as Colombia, right? Yeah, Colombia and Brazil, right? So there's a whole lot of pieces moving around that has to be analyzed. De, do you have anything you want to add to this?
I don't want the door closed all the way. Okay, with the this is a new revolution. I don't call it, well, not really a new revolution, but um, every time you change, like we went from farming nation to mechanical nation. Okay. We're going now to uh, what we can call digital nation. Okay. These things cause mass disruption. Okay. And it always generates wars. The I don't know if you guys can go back to when they had cities, you had city states in the time of in the days when Arcad and Babylon, and then when farming came in, those states land became now the thing because you can grow all kind of you can grow all kind. Your population was growing. So now when Britain came in, the Industrial Revolution, things started to change, and you needed uh, um, more land, even more than you had before. And Europe now is packed at its capacity. So now you see movement around the world with France and Germany and Britain and everyone, and they're moving to countries that they never had control over to get that land. Now you got this revolution that is the land is there, but what's happening is that now you getting a division among the people itself. Countries are forming alliances that they expect the worst because the worst happened in the time past. And America now is saying, look, the Chinese are building ports all across the world, Belt and Road. The Russians are also there. So if NATO going to be, we can use NATO as a means of getting our people together too, and we can bring people into NATO, not just the European, but we can move into Africa if we can find some African countries to do it. And it's like a kind of there's Chinese things, a Chinese game called Go. That if you can keep your enemies, if you can block your enemy's movement, you win the game. And that's what they're playing now. They're playing Go instead of chess. And the U.S. is making every move that it can um, to kind of maintain its hegemony. This India coming into NATO is not. It is possible to become a reality, but I doubt it. And it's not because it will start a war, but what are they going to give India? And they're going to have to give India a whole lot. Because right now, nobody in Europe or Germany is is paying to support NATO. They have a lot of members in NATO, but who is paying for the troops? The U.S. troops that are standing on their soil. The U.S. has to pay for that. The U.S. has to pay for the weapons. You know, so who is was India? India, in a way, will have to shoulder almost as much as the U.S. And what are they going to give the Indians for that?
All right, let me get to this next article. There's also been rumors about Nigeria joining NATO as well, but we'll see how that works out. All right, this one is from NPR. North Korea's newest missile appears similar to advanced Russian design. North Korea's latest short-range missile, tested on May 4th, looks similar to Russia's Iskander missile. North Korea describes it as a tactical guided missile. North Korea's newest missile has a striking resemblance to the advanced Russian design, according to experts analyzing images from a test of the weapon on Saturday morning. The missile, which North Korea describes as a tactical guided weapon, appears superficially to be nearly identical to the Russia's Iskander missile, a highly accurate short-range weapon capable of striking targets more than 150 miles away. Such a system has the potential to challenge missile defenses in South Korea and further escalate tensions in the region. It also shows that North Korea is developing new weapon systems, even as President Trump expresses optimism about a future deal with North Korea leader Kim Jong-un. The Iskander-style missile is a thing we need to start worrying about, says Melissa Hunnam, a weapons expert at One Earth Future. North Korea tested the weapon on May 4th as part of a strike drill that included the use of other weapons such as rocket artillery. It was the first publicized test of a missile since North Korea declared a voluntary moratorium on long-range intercontinental missile tests in April 2018. The new missile appears to be short-range, meaning it doesn't violate the moratorium. President Trump on Twitter downplayed the test. I believe that Kim Jong-un fully realizes the great economic potential of North Korea and will do nothing to interfere or end it. Nevertheless, the new missile does appear to be more advanced than some North Korea's previous designs. Unlike the North's longer-range missiles, this new short-range missile appears to be solid fueled. Haman says that means the fuel is already in the rocket before it leaves its fortified shelter. It can launch quickly with very little warning. Moreover, if it is an Iskander-like missile, the new weapon will fly at altitudes that will make it hard to intercept, according to Michael Ellerman, a physicist and senior fellow for missile defense at the International Institute of Strategic Studies. The Iskander flies at an altitude of roughly 30 miles. Elman says too high for U.S. Patriot surface-to-air missile interceptors, but too low for THAAD, a system capable of intercepting long-range missiles. Assuming the North Korean version operates in a similar way to Iskander, it poses a serious challenge to theater missile defense. The missile's true capabilities are somewhat murky, although it appears superficially similar to the Iskander. Hanum and Elam both note there's no way to know whether it's an imported Russian system, a North Korean knockoff, or something else entirely. Clearly, the North Koreans want us to think it's an Iskander. The question is it really an Iskander? There are several other short-range missiles that this new weapon also resembles, added Jeffrey Lewis, a scholar at the Middlesbury Institute of International Studies at Monterey in California. Ukraine's Grom-2 and South Korea's Hunman-2 also look like the new North Korean weapon. This is just kind of what this class of short-range missiles look like. But Lewis adds that regardless of where North Korea drew its inspiration, This new missile is indeed something bigger and better than anything it had in the past. The new weapon is roughly 3 feet in diameter and is capable of carrying 1,100-pound payload between 217 to 280 miles, according to team and its team analysis. So basically, North Korea has Scud missiles. I'm not surprised. A country that can build nuclear weapons and launch satellites into space also has, a Scud missile. I'm not all that surprised.
The Iskander ballistic missile is very, very devastating. I mean, if they copied that, that's like the Iskander is like the crown jewel of modern ballistic missiles like right now. And the crazy thing too is like if North Korea has it sooner rather than later, Iran's going to get it because Iran and North Korea they trade they share information with each other. Um, the Iskander missile is different than, for example, like Iran Shahab missiles and all that, whereas it's very accurate. Like it will wherever you send it to go, it will go, and it can carry heavy payloads as well, which makes it even more devastating. So, like you said, Mike, a country that can send satellites to space is capable of developing powerful, is capable of developing advanced ballistic missiles, and I think North Korea doing that that test was a message to Washington to like, listen, if you don't do your end of the deal, you know, we are still capable of developing advanced ballistic missiles. So, I mean, it could be the Russians gave the North Koreans some knowledge as well, because we don't know how Russia would is fighting this asymmetrical warfare. But if the North Koreans have it, the Iranians going to have it real soon, and this is putting U.S. forces in the region on notice because these Iskander missiles are devastating. I mean, Russia used them a lot in Syria, and I'll say that along with the with Russia's air power, and also what's the name of that artillery piece they have, the flamethrower, the one that like has like I forgot how many different artillery pieces on it. Those broke the back of the Syrian opposition. Like they scanned the missile was just devastating. They launched that thing in Aleppo, like at the height of the Aleppo offensive, man, and those rebels got fucked up. Them niggas got fucked up. So if North Korea has this, yeah, U.S. forces on the region, they got another thing to worry about.
Well, it's not. I don't think it's meant to hit anything um, in the U.S. This is very short range, so this is something that they would use in case you have ran across their border um, to stop an incoming military.
Yeah, that's what I meant. That U.S. forces in the region, that they're under notice. Like, yo, this is another thing they have to worry about. Because, I mean, the whole premise of
It's
why.
not. It can't fly that far though. It can't fly that far. It's very short range, so it only has about 200 miles in range, right? So the United States, Okinawa and Guam is too far away for that missile to be used. So
No,
I think where they would this missile.
yeah, they'll fire it at the DMZ. Basically, the DMZ, where right at the border.
Go ahead, D.
I'll pass up on this one. I don't know too much about this new missile. To me, it doesn't seem like it seems like the U.S. just put a picture up in front of a few so-called experts and asked them what they think, and then printed it. You know, like going CNBC and CBS. You know, say, hey, the Korean, this is a new weapons that we see the Koreans using, and what do you think? That's what it seemed like to me. So I have to wait till I get some more information before I go any further with this.
Yeah, I definitely think that they've always had these missiles, so I'm not sure why it's being considered as something new. Um, if I remember correctly, there's a different designation in North Korea. I forget what they call it, but it's in China. It's called the DF9 or something like that. I forget the name of the actual name of the Chinese version, but the
Dongfeng.
Chinese version.
Dongfeng, I think it is. I think it's a
Yeah, it's a
Dongfeng.
Dongfeng, but yeah, it's a Dongfeng, but it's a I don't know if it's a Dongfeng version 9 or a Dongfeng version 17. Let me actually look this up because it's gonna bug me.
But you
It's gonna
know,
bug me off.
The Iranians got something that can hit a target even further than that. I mean, right now the Iranians sitting on weapons that can hit Israel anywhere in Israel. So it's not. Uh, that's why Israel said, you know what? If you ever throw a missile at us, uh, you never hear Israel threatening to destroy somebody's country. Iran is the only one that is threatened to destroy.
Yeah,
I
here it
mean,
is
not
right
only
here. Let me
that.
share my.
To make this quick point, I mean, Hezbollah has they have a lot more short range ballistic missiles than they did in the last war, and they said like, yo, if the next war we're gonna fire our missiles at Haifa. We're gonna fire at you. We're gonna fire them at your electrical infrastructure. We're gonna destroy your desalination plants. Yeah. So
Well,
Israel would have to worry about missiles coming from Lebanon and Iran, which can overwhelm their defense system.
don't forget that Israel does have submarines that have nuclear capability, so you don't really want to. You want to make sure that everything is calculated. That if you're going to take out their land warfare capabilities, you also have to figure out where the submarines are, which is a difficult part for Lebanon because they don't have anti-submarine warfare capabilities. They've basically Israel basically convinced everybody at the United Nations to sign an agreement that says that Lebanon can't have any sort of military defense, which is the most absurd thing that I ever heard of. Even Syria has defense capabilities, but they basically uh, cut the balls off of Lebanon so that they can't have any military capabilities to defend themselves against Israel. So it's absurd, but that's how the ball bounces. That's why they have to deal with Iran and sneak these missiles in there and make their own missiles. A lot of their missiles are aging in Lebanon, so they have to use those missiles at some point. The older the missile gets, the worse the less accurate it is. And a lot of Lebanon's missiles are actually unguided missiles and not guided missiles. So they'll just fire and forget, right? So you point the missile in a direction and hope that it hits its target. Um, in this regard of Israel, their only countermeasure for that is to knock them all down with electronic warfare. So, anyways, this is the DF-17. This is the Chinese equivalent of the North Korean missile and the Iskander from Russia, right? So this is their version of it. Actually, that's the DF-15. Sorry, that's the DF-15. Although it says 17 in the picture, it says DF-15 on the missile itself. But the point of the matter is that everybody has these missiles. They're not that hard to get. Even Yemen has these same missiles in their arsenal.
Yeah, and that's why like the Houthis are able to continue to fire ballistic missiles into Saudi Arabia, like hit the Saudi oil fields and military bases as well. Yeah, I, 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 to go back to the Hezbollah part. So I guess like Hezbollah have those missiles as like for like psychological warfare, like that fear. Oh, let's just fire these missiles, and it puts the Israelis at the border region in a state of fear, kind of like what happened in the last war. You know, you saw these Israelis like running scared, you know, hiding in the basements and you know sirens going off. And the thing with Israeli society is like you can't have a war too long because you know since everyone's in the military, it's not good for your economy. So it's I guess in a sense Hezbollah's missile uh, arsenal is to be is just used as fire and forget and just send that psychological fear. And the thing too was like I read somewhere in the last war that the Israeli military couldn't like the Air Force couldn't track down where these missiles were coming from, and that was a major problem. Uh, Now Hezbollah has more missiles than they had. I think now they have like 100,000 like rockets and I think like 10,000 short range ballistic missiles, like a lot more than they had in the last war. So yeah, Hezbollah really tooled up from the last war.
Those 100,000 missiles are really just homegrown missiles. They're basically like hobby rockets. So you can actually go to Home Depot. Well, I won't say what you can do, but those missiles are basically fertilizer missiles. So you can buy fertilizer from any sort of garden variety store and add the right material to it, and it becomes a booster. So most of those rockets are actually homemade rockets. They're not actually military-based rockets. They're just homemade, but they're actually effective if you fire enough of them.
Interesting, interesting. But in regards to, so I have a question. So Iran's uh, ballistic missiles, I know they mass produce them and they hide them deep in the underground in the mountains of Iran. Uh,
Mhm.
is a lot of their missiles aging as well? Is that why they continually develop new missiles continuously? So what do they do with the old ones? Do they like break them down and just use different
Got to
parts?
use them.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, the United States had the same problem. That's why they fired those missiles into Syria. Those are missiles they had to fire off because they were aging missiles. Those are old Tomahawks. So they had to
No.
work out a deal. Trump had to call Putin and say, "Hey, I got these old missiles. I need to get them off. I need a good political victory. Help me out." And Putin says, "Okay, well, you could fire them into the desert over here at this old, this old depot that nobody lives at. Nobody's really there." And then Trump says, "Okay, thanks. I'll fire those missiles off." And then he fires them off, and then Putin, his military actually deflects them in midair and half of them fall in the ocean, and then the other half, fall in the desert, and then the ones that do make it, pretty much just land, some random places that nobody's really at. So that's how they get rid of missiles in terms of conflict.
Yeah, and plus I think I read it somewhere also too that that's what Russia did as well. Like in Syria, they had like these old missiles from like the 90s or from the Soviet Union that were mass produced, and they just used them to bomb the shit out of the Syrian rebels.
Well, they've always had those missiles at the Hamini Air Base, but or the Kamini Air Base, but my understanding is that they've always had them. It was just a matter of using them, um, and to get rid of the terrorists as fast as possible. And they only had a set budget to spend. All militaries have a set budget. I think DE probably can chime in on this. All militaries have a set budget of what they need to spend and how much every missile is going to cost if you fire it off. Those Tomahawk cruise missiles cost $100,000 a piece. So you factor in, they fired off about 20 or 30 of them. It's a good chunk of change for the United States to spend. but Raytheon made a pretty penny off of it.
That's right. And plus, in regards to the budget, like it's amazing what Russia achieved in Syria. I think they only spent like I think they only spent like like only $10 million. Like that whole operation cost I think like $10 million. I think a year, I believe, compared to in Yemen where Saudi Arabia is basically burning money. I think they're spending that same equivalent, like $10 million a day, like fighting that war in Yemen. Russia ran that war in Syria on the cheap, and they devastated the opposition, which is amazing. I don't think the U.S. would be able to do that.
Russia spent a $500 million on that war. So they knew what they were going to spend, and they got in, they got out on time, for the most part. They had cost overruns because they lost a few jets, they lost quite a few helicopters, and they lost quite a few soldiers in that. So Russia didn't just pay in money and pay in rubles; they paid in blood for this. So there is no backing down for them.
Yeah, yeah. That's interesting because those uh, they lost quite a few soldiers and like lost quite a few planes. But man, like the way they ran that war, I think historians have to look at that because basically all they provided was, I wouldn't say for the most part because they provided some ground support, but it was basically they ran the war in the air and they devastated the Syrian opposition, basically broke their back. Um, I don't know if you're paying attention. Like in Syria, the opposition are back at it again. They're launching an offensive in Hama and in Hama and parts of Latakia. And like the Russian Air Force again blunted the rebel opposition, and now the Syrian regime with Russia are doing a counteroffensive to retake those positions. So it just goes to show Russia knows how to wage a smart air war on the cheap. The United States doesn't. I think it's just more so the mentality of America, where like, hey, we're gonna spend as much money, whatever, in this operation. We don't know how much it costs, and it also comes down to the cost of the parts. Like you always mention this, how U.S. parts are so expensive, like so overly expensive. Uh, so
Because war is a business.
yeah, yeah, war's a
War is a
business.
business.
Hmm.
It's a profitable business. So that's why there's such an urgency to get into a fight with everybody, even if it's not warranted, because it's so profitable for major contractors, especially Lockheed Martin. Their whole entire bread and butter um, comes from war in Raytheon as well. So there is an there's a goal to basically pick a fight with all these other countries and nation states and things and so on and so forth. And when they can't fight everybody else, including Russia, they'll turn their guns on black people in America and start developing drones and all types of crazy gizmos just to go after innocent people because they really have run out of people to nation states to fight. Who else are they going to fight? If the United States is talking about invading Cuba, invading Venezuela, why wouldn't they invade Cuba? What's
Just
stopping them from going to Cuba? Cuba doesn't have nuclear weapons.
exactly, bro. Exactly.
Yeah, they don't have nuclear weapons.
Mhm.
Go ahead.
Well, I guess the problem is with Cuba is like Cuba has a pretty big military, and every Cuban has to do military service. So if they try to invade Cuba, then it'll be Vietnam all over again. It's the same thing with Iran. Like if you try to invade Iran, like I think I read somewhere like like if you try to invade Iran, I think within the first year of fighting, America would lose at least 50,000 soldiers. So imagine Vietnam. Like in Vietnam, they lost like 50 to 60,000 American soldiers. It took 12 years to reach that point. In 1 year, you lose that many amount of soldiers. That would be a bloodbath.
Well, DE knows more about Vietnam than I would, but I think when in regards to Iran, I don't think they'll go after Iran 100%. They're not going to send their soldiers in there. That's because the thing is, you can't cut and run when it comes to Iran or when it comes to any other country right now. Can't cut and run. China and Russia are not going to allow Iran to be overrun by America, because what that says is that Iran is 4 hours away from China. They're not going to allow. China's not going to allow their major oil supplier to be taken down by a Western power. It's just not going to happen. So a lot of Iran's weapons come from China. It doesn't really come from Russia. So those are Chinese-made weapons modified by the Iranians. So if there is going to be a conflict with Iran, it'll probably drag everybody into the war. You'll literally have World War III on the battlefield for sure. Syria was one thing, but Iran is another, because Iran can shut down the Straits of Hormuz. So you have to ask yourself, if you're a general, are you willing to risk that? And if you're Saudi Arabia, can you survive 10,000 missiles coming on top of your head? Because Iran has about 10,000 pointed at Riyadh, and they all can reach Riyadh within a few seconds. It's not that far. And it could pretty much take out your whole entire navy as well, because Saudi Arabia has a pretty good navy, but if you have X amount of torpedoes coming at you, it's pretty hard to fight against something like that. Anti-torpedo warfare.
Yeah, yeah, you're so right, Mike, and I think I have one more, like, the thing to ask you is, like, what are your thoughts on the recent tensions with Iran and the United States? Because the U.S. has sent 2 air carrier groups. They said they received intelligence that Iran was planning something. Iran has said they're withdrawing some of their some parts of the nuclear deal. So do you think it's reaching to a point that the Iranians are going to have to respond, because the U.S. is trying so hard to make sure their exports are zero? It's not likely to happen, but the Iranians are, like, they're getting annoyed at what America's doing, and they're probably planning to strike back somehow, either using their proxies or whatever. But John Bolton and Pompeo and Pence, they're really salivating at the thought of a war with Iran. So I mean,
It's not
I don't
them
know.
salivating at a war with Iran. It's not them salivating. It's actually Israel salivating at a war. Israel can't attack Lebanon and take the water that they need in southern Lebanon and hold it and occupy the country without major Muslim powers coming in and basically coming on top of Israel's head. They would have to fight their way out. Iran being the biggest contributor of Muslim states that will actually come to the defense of Lebanon. That being said, you have to take out Syria first before you can take out Iran, because taking out Iran before you take out Syria means that you have 100,000 Syrian soldiers coming at your backside, and you don't really know what to do with that. Allegedly, Syria has a ace up its sleeve that they have not really revealed as of yet. They've been holding on to it for quite some time, so it will be interesting to see what happens. If I remember correctly, it's actually a long range missile, something that they've been working on for a couple of years now. I'm not sure what's taking so long for it to get together, but I'm just reading the chat. Sorry. Yeah, the Iran deal. It's not Iran's fault. It's actually the U.S. who pulled out. It's Trump who pulled out of it. The problem is that the deal can still go forward, but the United States has threatened European companies for doing business with Iran over the deal. Well, that's not fair, right? A private company is not supposed to be subjugated to this. So what you're telling the Europeans is that you're really not my ally if you do business with Iran. Well, if that's going to be the case, then we might as well come up with an alternative system for financial mechanisms to do business in Iran, and that's why you're starting to see the Europeans pull to the left and not really pull with the United States to the right. They're trying to forge their own way. So there's an effort on their behalf to actually upkeep the deal, and then the United States is basically not the United States, but Trump itself is basically trying to reverse any sort of mechanisms that and deals that Obama has established. So everything that Obama has done in the past, he's undoing all of these things just to keep his campaign promises up. You know, I'm going to tear up the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I'm going to tear up this whole Cuba thing. You know, Obama made amends with Cuba, and all was supposed to be well, and then he tore that up. Same thing with China. I'm going to get tough with China. In reality, Obama made peace with China. So with that being said, a lot of this is really not Iran's fault. A lot of this is really not the other party's fault. It's really just Trump tearing up all of the deals just because he doesn't like Obama, or he didn't like Obama, right? He's a Muslim. You know, check his passport. Where's his birth certificate? You know, remember that? So that's what this is all about.
Yeah, but I feel like Trump's obsession of trying to break down everything Obama has done is he might unintentionally start something that he didn't originally wanted to do, because they're sending two aircraft carrier groups into the Persian Gulf. They're sending B-52 bombers. It's like, goddamn, like what you niggas like sending all that firepower for? And the excuse they're using is that they receive intelligence from Israel, which is laughable. That Iran was planning to do something, but I feel like they wanted to use that as an excuse to send all that firepower there, but it seems that Bolton is behind all this ratcheting up of tension, and it gets worse and worse. And Iran today said they withdraw from certain agreements of the Iran deal, and Pompeo already went on Twitter like a self-righteous prick, like, "Oh, the international community has to do something. Iran is trying to restart the nuclear program." So I feel like, you know, with all this tension, with all this obsession trying to break down everything Obama has done, Trump might find himself accidentally, well, I want to say accidentally, because Bolton wants it, but he might find himself starting a war that he can't finish, which would be devastating for the United States.
Well, he wouldn't start a war because he would have to attack Iran from both sides. You can't attack it from just the Persian Gulf. Well, with that being said, China and Russia is not going to allow that to happen. Neither would Pakistan, right? None of these countries. Let me share my screen because so people in the chat really understand what we're saying here.
I'm gonna ask you guys a question. What would a war with Iran accomplish for the United States or Israel? That's the question that's not being answered. And
Well, that's what we do.
this whole thing is a distraction from Venezuela.
Oh yes, it's distracting. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, it's a distraction because they know they're failing in Venezuela. Like they put up all this hype on like how, you know, Guaidó is going to come to power and Maduro is going to fall, but it's been an abject failure. So, but the main problem is like with all this ratcheting up of tension. Yeah, it's all distraction, but the thing is, you know, many wars have started by accident, and the thing is they keep pushing Iran, keep pushing Iran, keep pushing Iran. Like the Irans are gonna have to like respond back. I mean, they've been patient for so long, but it's like when someone keeps bullying you, like at some point you're gonna have to lash out. Now, I don't think Iran will fire ballistic missiles over the Persian Gulf. I don't think that's stupid, but they can hurt. They can use it asymmetrical warfare.
But what's going to happen?
They've already done it.
If they attack Iran, Saudi Arabia as a nation is not going to exist anymore.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
The Saudis going to lose every oil field, every one. all the whole Persian Gulf. No more oil is going to be flowing out of there. If they don't, if they attack, if when I say attack, if they drop, if they fly bombers or what, they just have to level Iran that nobody's left standing. Otherwise, what's going to happen? That whole
Well,
area
they
called
would need
Saudi Arabia now is not going to be. You know, the king of Saudi Arabia had to flee. Serious.
you,
They already
you,
tried
you,
it with Iraq when they tried to get Saddam Hussein to go into Iran, and even with
you
him
would need
with weapons of mass destruction, Iran still came out ahead.
you would need to take out all of Iran's missiles that are dug in inside these mountains, right? You, United States doesn't have any artillery that can actually take that stuff out and clear airspace.
Yeah, but even if they don't take out, even Iran, even if Iran doesn't fire one missile, they can still clear Saudi Arabia. I'm talking just the Iranian military. You see what they did in Syria, and they do it methodically. I mean, if I had to put them, if you put them on a, if you put them in the desert of Saudi Arabia and the Israeli army, the Iranians will beat Israel with nobody else there. The Iranians will whip Israel.
Mhm. I just want to go over this map, this Google Earth, real quick. For those in the chat that are just now paying attention to this, basically, Iran is surrounded by multiple states, right? Plus, it has the Caspian Sea or Caspian Lake. I don't know how it's a sea because it's not connected to any external bodies of water. But I digress. The Iran is surrounded by Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, um, Iraq, Syria, Azerbaijan, Armenia, as well as Oman and as well as India as well. So India gets its oil from Iran, a good portion of it. If you take out Iran and you put an energy embargo on everybody else, you're going to drag every single one of those countries into war because their livelihood is dependent upon energy, and energy is oil, and so oil means that if that supply line is cut off and there's a conflict and they can't get their oil, they have no other choice other than to get involved in this. So I don't foresee the United States doing this on their own. They're not going to go in there on their own, and Israel can't fight it either because they won't survive. That would be a suicide mission for them, and they know that because Turkey and Iran share borders as well, so they have very little interest in seeing Iran be taken down. Now, if you look closer to the east, you will see that Iran is not that far away from China. It's only 4 hours away. And if you look to the north through the Caspian, Russia is right there. So the Caspian connects Iran to Russia, which is only about a 2 to 3 hour boat ride right up to Russia's doorstep. Russia would never tolerate Iran being taken down because the Caspian Sea is a soft underbelly militarily for them. And then you take into consideration um, Pakistan. They don't want all of those refugees coming across their border, So they would have no other choice but to be involved in this. So what I'm saying here is attacking Iran would bring everybody out in full force.
There's too much at stake. So, but man, I hope that doesn't happen, bro. And with all this ratcheting of tensions, it's just it's just you can see who's behind. It's just Bolton and Pompeo. They're just pushing this. They just pushing this bullshit. But um, I mean, hopefully the Iranians can hold on strong because basically the U.S. is trying to economically strangle them, putting all these sanctions. Trump just put these new sanctions on banning Iranian steel from being traded or whatever. It's just it it's going to fail because China and India have all said they're still going to do business with Iran, and the EU is already coming up with their own separate mechanism to allow trade with Iran. So again, it's just it's just Trump's obsession of trying to undo everything Obama's done, but it's coming at the detriment of the United States. So,
Well, because Trump doesn't work for the United States, he works for Israel.
yep.
You know who's in control of you when you can't criticize them. All right, this last one is from Forbes.com. What China wants from Africa, everything. China wants everything from Africa: its strategic location, its oil, its rare earth metals, and its fish, leaving African nations indebted to Beijing. In its long history, Africa has served the global ambitions of many foreigners. Foreigners have reached out to Africa as missionaries, financiers, and infrastructure builders. They have promised to place the continent to the globalization map on the globalization map and help its people grow out of poverty. But they ended up grabbing Africa's riches, colonizing one nation after another, and letting their people steep in poverty. That may end up being the case again with China's recent infrastructure investment projects in the continent. On the surface, these projects uh, seem to serve the quest of African nations to build a sound infrastructure. But on closer examination, they serve China's ambitions to write the rules of the next stage of globalization. China wants to use Africa as a location to secure maritime roads and the OBOR projects, One Belt, One Road projects that facilitate Chinese exports, as evidenced by Beijing's large military presence in Djibouti. Then there are Africa's resources: oil, rare earth metals, and fish. As South as a South African, I've seen China's activities on the continent up close, says Ted Bauman, senior research analyst at Banyan Hill Publishing. It's clear that China's primary goal with foreign investment is geopolitical, not economic. The most consequential investment are undertaken by state-owned companies, not by Chinese private capital. They tend to focus on infrastructure like highways, ports, and dams, and on public networks like the electrical grid. That's something many African countries desperately need in their bid to develop their economies. The trouble is that these investments help to bind countries to China politically and through debt obligations, explains Bauman. It creates a form of leverage that China can use to force these countries to support their ambitions globally. In some cases, such as Angolan oil sector or Congolese rare earth mining, Chinese investment helps to lock in supply relationships with essential commodities. Meanwhile, Chinese boats are reaching to West Africa, sweeping the area of any kind of fish that tries to swim through the spread nets. Jean-Meg Liu, China practice lead at Access Partnership, a global public policy consultancy for the tech sector, raises a more fundamental problem with Chinese investments. China's investments are being rolled in a somewhat awkward, if not controversial fashion, she observed. For example, Huawei's smart city project in Colombo Port City, Sri Lanka, faces criticism for being overly ambitious and debt laden, not to mention the Ubuntu, Ubuntu Tota port, which has been placed in Chinese hands for the next century as a result of Beijing's debt trap. Chinese President Xi aims to realize the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation by projecting power overseas through the Belt and Road Initiative, which covers Southeast Asia and Africa, as Lu. The political economic the political economy effort is paired with China's growing military might in the South China Sea and the African continent, posing a growing challenge to U.S. security umbrella worldwide. I think we kind of knew all of this, that China wants everything because it needs everything. It has a billion people it needs to feed, and because of that, it can't. If it doesn't feed those people, they are screwed. That those a billion people are going to come knocking at the government's doorstep, demanding change, and I don't think that the Communist Party can really handle all of that. So,
This thing did not start today. In 1971, Richard Nixon went to China, and he made a deal between him and the Europeans. Made a deal with China. We're going to move all manufacturing to China, and we'll give you access to Africa, raw materials in Africa. After China got all the factories built and the technology in China, the Chinese decided, you know what, we don't really need you after all. And they started going to Africa and say, look, we make a deal with you, we make a deal with you. Cutting out the middleman, France, Germany, all of them, US. What happened is that when China started to grow without permission from these other people, they had to find some way of controlling China. That's why you see all these articles about, oh, China is the bad guy now trying to get everything. But guess what? They made the deal with China. When you made the deal with the devil, now you change your mind. Guess what? Now, China, as a manufacturer, their cost is going to go up. So guess what they're going to do? They're going to move to a place where the cost is going to be lower than their cost at home. So when they start building things in Africa and they hire an African, Africans going to learn. Not only Africans going to learn, after a while, Africans going to go to work for you after they're going to learn how to do these things. They're going to find out that they can make improvements on it. So they're going to start their own companies. It might not be today or the next 10 years, but the next generation of Africans is going to be doing that. And that's what the European is scared to hell of.
They fear developed Africa. I mean that's the main issue with the European. Africa is the youngest continent. Its economy is growing faster than any other continent around the world. It has a youthful population, so the potential for Africa is very bright. In regards to what China wants from Africa, China saw the potential of Africa because Africa is so vast. It's a vast continent with so much resources than any other continent in the world. So China sees like, listen, we have a billion people. We have to feed these people. We have to provide electricity. We have to provide them all these services. And the only continent that is big enough, the only place that's big enough to even supply all these needs is the continent of Africa. So it's it's like this. The Africans get development, they learn technology, which will help them going in this 21st century. And all China is just saying is like, listen, just give us some resources, and we'll, you know, the only practice I don't like what the Chinese do is with giving them those ridiculous loans that they can't afford to pay back. Like, to me, that is shady as fuck. But it's the Chinese. What do you expect? If you live in any major city with a large Chinese American population, you know how those motherfuckers be shiesty when it comes to money. But that's not the point. But this is a great opportunity for Africa to get developed, because once they get infrastructure, once more Africans get into IT, um, and once a lot of when more Africans get more proficient with technologies, just like what DE said, they can develop their own companies at home, and then within 100 years, I think we talked about this before, Mike. Like, the Africans are gonna probably be developed so much that in 100 years they'll tell the Chinese to get the fuck out. You know what I mean? Like, on some like kind of like what the Americans did in the American Revolutionary War. They're like, listen, we are far more advanced than you right now. We have developed to the point that we don't need y'all anymore. So um, we're not going to see the effects of the beginning effects of Africa's development. We're starting to see it, but I think within 10 to 15 years, Africa will look much better, even though Africa today looks much more better than it was 10, 15 years ago. Uh, that's why I'm very optimistic about Africa. I really am. I know I spoke to my Nigerian friend about it. He doesn't seem too optimistic, but I see it as this is the chance Africa can get into the 21st century, and and then within 100 years and 150 years, the center of power will be in Africa. I mean, we won't live to see it, but um, it'll be the great poetic justice. So I know a lot of Africans are not happy what the Chinese are doing in the continent, but I just they have to just try to negotiate better deals with the Chinese in one sense, and also see it as their chance to develop, because the West is not going to do it. America is not going to develop Africa. Europe is too broken to develop Africa. So it is what it is.
Yeah, Europe is going to fall apart before Africa fully comes to actualization. So, but that's my final take on this. And before we close out, so thank you all for joining us. We'll be back tomorrow with Lionel's Crypto Talk. Binance was hacked yesterday for $140 million in Bitcoin. So make sure you all check that out, because Lionel is going to be covering all that in depth tomorrow. So you all have a good night.
Peace. Good night, everybody.